Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, so I've never posted anything like this before. And honestly, I'm only doing it now because it's been stuck in my head for years, and I need to get it out somewhere. People might actually get it. I'm not a writer or anything, so I'm just going to tell it like it happened. This is about the thing I saw on Brownsville Road. It was the fall of my senior year of high school. Me and my buddy, we were driving to a football game at Licking Valley High School. It was a Friday night, the kind of late October evening that's already pitch black by 7 o'clock. The air was crisp and cool, and you could smell that damp, leafy smell of Ohio in autumn coming through the car vents. We were in my beat-up old Jeep Cherokee, the one with the passenger door that you had to slam twice to get it to close right. We were just talking about normal stuff. The game. Who was going to be there? Some stupid test we had in history class that Monday. Nothing important, just killing time on the drive. We were heading north on Brownsville Road, which is this super narrow, winding road that cuts through the woods. There aren't many houses out there, just a lot of trees and hills. And the road twists and turns so much you have to pay attention. Your headlights just slice through the darkness, and beyond that, it's just nothing. Pure black. We were coming up on the area near Clay Lick. I know the road pretty well, so I knew there was a sharp left-hand curve coming up. I slowed down a little, my hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, just cruising. The radio was on low, some rock station playing in the background. My friend was in the passenger seat, leaning his head against the window, just watching the trees go by. As I started to turn into the curve, my headlights swept across the road ahead. And that's when I saw it. Right in the middle of my lane, maybe 50, 60 feet ahead at first, was something squatting. My brain didn't process it right away. It was just a dark shape. I thought it was a deer at first, a big one, maybe crouched down for some reason. But as I got closer, maybe 30 feet away now, the shape just didn't make sense. It was huge, way bigger than any person. It was squatting on its haunches, kind of like how a gorilla sits, but its posture was wrong. It was more like a baboon, with its back hunched and its arms resting between its legs, but it was so much heavier, so much more solid than any animal I'd ever seen. It was covered in this thick, shaggy, dark fur, not black, but a deep, wet-looking brown, like the color of old tree bark. The head was kind of sunk down between its shoulders, and I couldn't see a face, just a dark patch where a face should be. My foot instinctively went for the brake, but it was too late and I was going too fast for the curve. I was probably doing 40, 45. I remember my stomach just dropping, a cold jolt going through my whole body. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. This was different. It was massive, and it was just sitting there. In the middle of the damn road, I braced myself. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles were white. I remember the feeling of the cheap vinyl steering wheel cover digging into my palms. I was maybe 10 feet from it. I could see the individual clumps of its fur, matted and dirty. I could see the sheer bulk of its shoulders and back. It was so real, so solid. I was absolutely certain I was about to hit it. I was waiting for the thud, the crunch, the shattering of glass. I remember a stupid, fleeting thought about my dad killing me for wrecking the Jeep. And then it was gone. It didn't run. It didn't stand up. It didn't move in any way that my eyes could follow. 1 second it was there, a solid, hairy mass filling my vision through the windshield, and the next second there was nothing but empty blacktop. It vanished, just poof. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd slammed on the brakes and the Jeep shuddered to a stop, the tires squealing a little on the pavement. I was gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead at the empty spot where the thing had been. My breath was coming in these short, ragged gasps. "What the hell was that?" my friend said, his voice quiet and shaky. He'd been half asleep, and the sudden braking had jolted him upright. I couldn't answer. I just sat there, my whole body trembling. The adrenaline was like a fire in my veins. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing, just the dark, empty road behind us, swallowed by the night. I cranked my neck around and looked out the back window. Nothing. No movement in the trees on either side of the road. No sound. It was dead silent except for the low hum of the engine and my own pounding heart. "Did you see that?" I finally managed to say, my voice sounding thin and strange. "I saw something," he said. He was leaning forward, peering out the windshield. "What was it, a bear?" "That wasn't a bear," I said, and my voice was firmer now, edged with a fear I'd never felt before. Bears don't sit like that, and they don't. They don't just disappear. I put the Jeep in drive and started moving again, slowly. My foot was shaking on the gas pedal. I kept my eyes glued to the road, scanning the edges where the tree line started, a wall of impenetrable shadow. Every shape looked like it was moving. Every stump, every fallen log. My brain was turning it into that thing, hunched and waiting. We drove in silence for a full minute, just the sound of the tires on the road. The air in the car felt heavy, charged. I could feel the sweat cooling on my back. "It was huge," my friend whispered almost to himself. He was staring out his window into the darkness. It was just there, and then it wasn't. "It was squatting," I said, my eyes still fixed ahead. "Like it was, I don't know, taking a leak or something. But it was so big, its back was all hunched. The fur was so thick, man. It was real." We started trying to rationalize it. We went through every possibility. A person in a costume, out here, on this road, in the middle of nowhere, on a Friday night. And the way it moved, or didn't move. It didn't get up and run. It vanished. It was too fast, too fluid, too impossible. A sick, injured animal? Nothing that big moves that fast. A bear standing on its hind legs? This wasn't standing. It was squatting, low to the ground, and it was broader and heavier looking than any bear. We ran out of explanations fast. The conversation just died out because there was no logical answer. There was only what we had both seen and the cold, creeping dread that was settling into my bones. We drove the rest of the way to the game in near silence. The cheerful lights of the high school, the sounds of the crowd and the band, it all felt wrong. It felt like we were coming back from some other world. We parked and just sat in the car for a few minutes before getting out. "We can't tell anyone," my friend said finally. He looked at me and his face was pale under the parking lot lights. "They'll think we're crazy." I just nodded. He was right. Who would believe us? Two kids saying they saw a monster that disappeared into thin air. We went to the game. I tried to act normal, to cheer and talk to people, but my mind was a million miles away, back on that dark curve on Brownsville Road. I kept seeing it. The image was burned into the back of my eyelids, that dark, hairy shape hunched over, occupying a space and then not occupying it, the sheer physicality of it, and then the utter impossibility of its disappearance. The ride home was worse. We had to go back the same way. I drove so slow, my high beams on the whole time, my hands clenched on the wheel. Every shadow was a threat. Every time the woods opened up on the side of the road, my heart would skip a beat. I was terrified that we'd see it again, standing at the tree line watching us. Or worse, that we wouldn't see it at all until it was right in front of us again. But we didn't see anything. The road was just a road. The woods were just woods. We got to my friend's house, and he got out without saying much, just a quick, "See ya," and he hurried inside. I drove the last few minutes to my house, parked in the driveway, and just sat there for a long time, staring at the garage door. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to have to pretend everything was fine for my parents. I never told them. I never told anyone else. What would I even say? It's been years now. I'm out of college. I have a job, a normal life. but I've never forgotten it. Not for a single day. That image is stuck in my brain forever. The thing on the road, its posture, its fur, its impossible vanishing act. I've looked stuff up online since then. I've read other people's accounts. I know what people call it. But saying the name doesn't make it any less terrifying. It doesn't explain how something that big and that real could just be gone in the blink of an eye. It doesn't explain the feeling I had, the primal, gut-level certainty that I was looking at something I was never supposed to see. Sometimes, if I'm driving on a dark country road at night, I'll get a chill down my spine for no reason. My eyes will strain against the darkness, and for a split second, I'll think I see a dark shape just beyond the reach of my headlights. I never have, but I know it was there that one night. I know what I saw, and I know that whatever it was, it's still out there somewhere. Story 2. It was still dark that morning. The kind of dark that feels heavy and solid, like you could reach out and touch it. The clock on the stove said it was just before 6, but I'd been up for a little while already, the way you are when you get older. Sleep doesn't stick as well. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I was standing at the kitchen sink, looking out the window into nothing really. Just the black shape of the trees against a slightly less black sky. My breath was fogging the cold glass. It was late October of '93, and the cold in Ferry County had already started to bite, a deep, damp cold that gets right into your bones. I was living with my husband then, in our little house right on Empire Creek, a few miles outside of Malo. Malo wasn't much, just a spot in the road, a handful of houses and a general store that was never open when you needed it. We liked the solitude. We had 2 dogs, both big mutts, part German Shepherd, part who knows what. They were good dogs, protective without being mean. Their names were Bear and Duke. They slept outside in an insulated doghouse I'd built for them, but they usually spent the first part of the morning on the porch, waiting for one of us to come out and feed them. That's what I was about to do. I'd already scooped the kibble into their metal bowls. The coffee was just starting to perk, filling the kitchen with that good, bitter smell. I pulled on my heavy coat over my nightgown and shoved my feet into the muddy boots by the door. The brass doorknob was freezing, a real shock to the hand. The moment I opened the door, the cold air hit me in the face, sharp and clean. It was that quiet time just before the birds start up, when the world feels like it's holding its breath. Bear and Duke were usually right there, tails thumping, but they weren't on the porch. I could just make out their shapes down by the edge of the lawn, near where the grass turned to the steep bank that led down to Empire Creek. They were standing stiff, side by side, staring into the trees on the other side of the creek. I remember feeling a little annoyed. "Boys," I called out, my voice too loud in the silence. "Come on, breakfast." They didn't even twitch, not a glance back at me. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Duke, especially, was a chowhound. The sound of his bowl hitting the porch usually brought him running. I took a step off the porch, the wooden boards creaking under my weight. "Bear, Duke," I called again, a little sharper. That's when the barking started. It wasn't their normal bark, not the, "Hey, there's a squirrel" bark or the "someone's driving up the road" bark. This was different. It was a deep, guttural, frantic sound. A scared sound. The hair on the back of my neck, under my thick braid, stood up. I could see their silhouettes clearly now against the pale gravel of the creek bed. Their hackles were up, a ridge of fur standing straight along their spines, and their tails weren't wagging or even held high. They were tucked tight between their legs. I froze on the bottom step, the 2 bowls of food forgotten in my hands. My heart was starting to thump a little harder in my chest. What was out there? A cougar, a bear. We had both around here, but the dogs usually stood their ground, barking to warn it off, not sounding terrified. I strained my eyes, trying to see what they were seeing. The other side of the creek was a wall of Douglas firs and pine, so thick you couldn't see more than 20 feet into them. The pre-dawn light was a tricky thing. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't light either. It was a grey, washed-out world where shapes were soft and details were stolen. The creek itself was just a ribbon of silver noise, gurgling over the rocks, and then I saw it. At first, my brain did what brains do. It tried to make sense of the unfamiliar by fitting it into a familiar box. I thought it was a man, a really big, really tall man, standing next to one of the bigger fir trees, maybe 30 yards away across the water. He was just standing there, perfectly still, facing the dogs. My first stupid thought was, what is some guy doing out there in the woods at this hour? But the shape was wrong, the proportions were off. This thing was massive through the chest and shoulders, way broader than any man I'd ever seen. And it was tall, so tall. Its head seemed to be up in the lower branches of the tree, and it was covered in something dark, not clothing. It looked shaggy, like a thick, matted pelt of hair. The dog's barking became a fever pitch, a continuous panicked roar. They weren't advancing. They were planted, barking their heads off, but with their bodies low to the ground, like they were ready to bolt. I just stood there, frozen, my fingers tight around the cold metal of the dog bowls. I couldn't process it. My mind was stuttering, trying to find a label, a bear walking on its hind legs. But it was too upright, too still. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. I could see that much. Then it moved. It didn't turn its head. The whole upper part of its body rotated towards me. It was a slow, deliberate movement. It was no longer looking at the dogs. It was looking at me. That's when the fear hit me. Not nervousness, not unease. This was a pure, cold, liquid terror that flooded my veins and turned my legs to water. It was the kind of fear you read about, the kind that smells like copper in the back of your throat. My breath caught in my chest. The thing was looking right at me, and in that dim light, I couldn't see its face, just a darker patch in the shadow of its head. But I could feel its attention. It was focused on me. My heart wasn't just thumping now, it was hammering against my ribs, a wild, frantic bird trying to escape. I felt dizzy. I think I made a sound, a little choked gasp. And then it did the thing that I still see when I close my eyes, the thing that makes no sense and all the sense in the world. It shifted its weight, just slightly, and pressed itself against the tree it was standing beside. I don't mean it stepped behind the tree, I mean it aligned itself with the trunk. It was a big tree, maybe 3 feet across, and this thing was so wide it should have stuck out on both sides, but it didn't. It seemed to flatten, or maybe it just knew exactly how to stand. The dark, shaggy hair on its body blended perfectly with the deep, grooved bark of the fir. Its shape just melted into the shape of the tree. It used the trunk as cover, like a soldier would use a wall. One moment, there was a massive, impossible creature staring at me from across the creek, and the next, there was just a tree. The outline was gone. It was there. I knew it was there, but my eyes couldn't pick it out from the pattern of the bark and the shadows. The sheer intelligence of that movement, the calculated stealth of it, was more terrifying than if it had charged. A bear doesn't do that. A man doesn't do that, not like that, not without a ghillie suit and a lot of practice. This was instinctual. This was what it did. My brain finally kicked into gear, screaming one word: husband. I had to get my husband. I tore my eyes away from the tree, from the spot where I knew it was hiding. The movement was jerky, painful. My neck muscles were locked tight. I dropped the dog bowls. The metal clattered on the porch steps and kibble scattered everywhere. But I didn't care. I stumbled back up the steps, my boots clumsy and heavy. I fumbled for the doorknob, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn it. I burst back into the kitchen, the warmth of the house feeling alien and wrong. "John!" I yelled, my voice a high, strangled thing. "John, get up! There's something out there!" I ran to the bedroom. He was still asleep, a lump under the blankets. I shook him hard. "John! Wake up!" He grumbled, rolling over. "What is it?" "Outside! There's something in the trees. The dogs are going crazy. He must have heard the pure panic in my voice because he was out of bed in seconds, pulling on his pants and grabbing the rifle we kept in the closet. He didn't ask questions. He just moved. I followed him back to the kitchen door, my whole body trembling. He paused at the door, rifle held ready, and looked out the window. "I don't see anything," he said, his voice low and calm. "The tree," I whispered, pointing a shaking finger, "by the big fir across from where the dogs were." He unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch, me hovering right behind him, clutching the doorframe. The world had gone completely silent. The dogs had stopped barking. I looked for them. They were no longer down by the creek bank. They were huddled together on the porch, pressed against the wall of the house, shivering. Not just cold shivers, whole-body tremors of sheer terror. Their eyes were wide and white-rimmed, fixed on the same spot across the creek. They were utterly silent. John scanned the tree line, the rifle stock pressed against his shoulder. He took a few cautious steps off the porch, his head moving slowly as he searched. The sky was getting lighter now, a pale, milky blue washing out the deep gray. You could see details in the yard, the individual blades of grass, the scattered dog food. "You sure you saw something?" he asked, his voice still quiet. "Maybe it was a shadow. The light's bad this time of day." "It wasn't a shadow," I said, my voice trembling. "It was there. It looked right at me, and then it hid behind the tree." He walked down to the creek bank, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stood right where the dogs had been, looking across the water. I stayed on the porch, my arms wrapped around myself, watching him and watching that tree. My eyes were glued to it, searching for any break in the pattern, any sign of a shape that didn't belong. John spent a good 10 minutes out there. He walked a little way along our side of the creek, looking up and down. The forest was perfectly still. No birds chirped, no squirrels chattered. It was a dead, empty silence, the kind that feels heavy and watchful. Finally, he came back up to the porch, lowering the rifle. "There's nothing there, honey. Nothing I can see, anyway. No tracks on this side of the creek, and the water's too high and rocky on the other side to cross and check. Maybe it was a bear. A big one, standing up." I just shook my head. I couldn't find the words to explain the way it had moved, the way it had used the tree. A bear doesn't blend. A bear lumbers off. This thing had vanished. It had chosen to disappear. He looked at the dogs, who were still pressed against the house, shaking. He reached down to pet Bear, and the dog flinched, then leaned into his hand, whining softly. "They saw something, that's for sure," John admitted, his tone more serious now. "They're spooked bad." We went back inside. I made coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I kept going to the window, staring out at that one specific tree. The sun was fully up now, casting long golden beams through the forest. It looked peaceful, normal, beautiful even, but it wasn't. The normal had been ripped away. I spent the whole day jumpy, starting at every little sound. The dogs wouldn't leave the porch. They wouldn't eat their food. They just sat there, staring into the woods. Later that afternoon, I forced myself to walk down to the creek bank. The air was crisp and cool. The creek bubbled happily. I stood in the exact spot and looked at the exact tree. In the full daylight, I could see every groove in the bark, every knot, every patch of moss. There was nothing there. No sign, no broken branches, no hair caught on the bark. Nothing. That was the worst part. The complete and total lack of evidence. If it had been a bear, there would have been tracks, scat, something. There was nothing. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. I never saw it again. We lived there for another 3 years before moving closer to town, and nothing like that ever happened again. But I never felt the same about those woods. The solitude felt different after that. It felt like a cover. The silence felt like it was hiding something. I know what I saw. I know the difference between a man, a bear, and a shadow. This was none of those things. It was something else, something old and smart and unbelievably good at not being seen. The way it turned its body, the way it just merged with that tree. That wasn't an animal reacting. That was a thinking, calculating creature making a choice to hide. The sheer, chilling intelligence of that act is what has stayed with me all these years. It wasn't just a monster in the woods. It was a presence that knew exactly what it was doing, and it knew that I had seen it, and then it was just gone. Story 3. All right, I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I've told no one, not my wife, not my buddies at work, no one. I don't think they'd get it, or they'd just laugh and slap me on the back and tell me I need to lay off the cheap beer. But I know what I saw, and it's been eating at me ever since. It was early October last year, the kind of day that starts off crisp and clear, the sky this impossible bright blue, but you can feel the bite in the air that tells you winter's not messing around up here in Marquette County. I was out by my pole barn, the big one I put up a few years back to store the tractor and all my other junk. I've got 20 acres, most of it wooded, with a swampy lowland off to the west. It's quiet. That's why we bought the place. I was splitting wood. I had a good rhythm going. You know how it is. Thud, crack, toss the pieces into the growing pile. It's hard work, but it's honest. And it feels good to be doing something with your hands, something that'll keep you warm when the snow really starts to fly. The only sounds were my own grunts, the crack of the maul hitting the rounds, and the chatter of some squirrels having a fit in the pines. My 2 dogs, a pair of coonhounds, were inside the house. My wife had taken them in to clean their ears, which they hate, so I was enjoying the unusual silence. I was just setting up another big chunk of maple when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Over to my left, about 70, maybe 80 yards away, right at the tree line, where the real thick stuff starts. My first thought, like always, was deer. We get a lot of them, but this was different. The motion was slow, heavy. Not the quick, skittish flicker of a white tail or the graceful bound of a doe. This was a steady, deliberate movement, like something that had no reason to be afraid. So I stopped, maul still in my hands, and I just watched. I squinted, trying to see past the first layer of brush and into the deeper shadows between the trees. The sun was behind me, so it was lighting up that part of the woods pretty good. And then I saw them. There were 3 of them. They were walking in a single file line, moving from my right to my left, heading towards the swamp. My brain just sort of short-circuited for a second, trying to make sense of the shapes. The 2 in the front and back were massive. I mean, just huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and these things made me feel like a kid. They had to be over 7 feet tall, easy. And they weren't just tall. They were built, not like a bodybuilder, all cut and defined, but like a wall, solid, thick with muscle under all that hair. Their shoulders were impossibly wide, and they moved with this powerful, easy grace that was terrifying. They weaved through the trees like they'd done it 1,000,000 times, their steps silent on the bed of fallen leaves. They were covered in hair, dark, shaggy hair, but it had this reddish tint to it, like old rust or wet clay. The sun caught it in patches, and it wasn't a uniform color. It was darker in some places, lighter in others, matted in spots. The one in the middle was smaller, maybe 5 feet tall or so. It had the same build, just scaled down, and it moved exactly like the bigger ones, keeping perfect pace in the line. I stood there, frozen, solid. My heart wasn't just pounding. It felt like it was trying to break out of my chest. I could feel the sweat on my palms, cold and slick against the wooden handle of the maul. My breath caught in my throat, and I had to consciously remember to breathe, taking these shallow, silent little sips of air. I was terrified that if I made any sound at all, they'd turn. I was so damn grateful my dogs were inside. If they'd been out, they would have lost their minds, barking and carrying on, and I don't know what would have happened. They kept walking, and for a few seconds, I thought they might just pass on by without noticing me. I was just a statue beside my pole barn, hoping to blend into the wood and metal. And then it happened. The last one in the line, one of the big ones, just stopped. It didn't jerk to a halt or anything, it just paused. Its head, which was kind of blocky and sat low on those huge shoulders, turned, not its whole body, just its head, and it looked right at me. I swear to God, it looked right into my eyes. Time just stopped. That feeling of cold fear turned into a solid block of ice in my gut. I couldn't have moved if the barn was on fire. Its face, it wasn't a bear's face. It wasn't a man's face. It was just this dark, hairy mass, but I could make out the shape of a brow ridge, and beneath that there was a glint, a deep, intelligent glint. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was a look of assessment, of knowing. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching. It held that look for what felt like an hour. In reality, it was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, long enough for the sheer primal terror to completely root me to the spot. I wasn't a man with a weapon anymore. I was prey that had been spotted. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything, but my legs were just 2 pillars of concrete. Then, as calmly as it had stopped, it turned its head back forward and took a step, following the others. It didn't hurry, it didn't make a sound. It just resumed its walk, its huge, muscular back moving away from me. I watched, my body still locked up, as the 3 of them continued their single-file procession. They moved through a patch of thicker pines, their dark, reddish-brown forms blending into the shadows, and then they were just gone. They didn't crash through the undergrowth. They didn't snap a single branch. One moment they were there, and the next, the woods were empty. I didn't move for a long time. I'm not sure how long I stood there, maul still poised, my arms starting to ache from being held in the same position. The only thing that finally broke the spell was a chickadee landing on a branch near me and letting out a little call. It was like the world started up again. I slowly, carefully lowered the maul and set it on the ground. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely let go of the handle. I looked back at the tree line. Nothing. Just the same maples and pines, the same brush. It was so quiet. The squirrels had stopped their chattering. Everything had gone dead silent. I took a few stumbling steps back toward the house, my legs feeling like jelly. I kept my eyes glued to the spot where they'd disappeared. Part of me expected them to come bursting out of the trees, but nothing happened. I got inside, my heart still hammering. My wife was in the living room with the dogs, who were now happily chewing on treats. She looked up and said, "You're back early. Get enough wood." I just nodded. I couldn't form words. I went to the sink and got a glass of water, my hand trembling so much the water sloshed around the glass. I drank it in one go, the cold doing nothing to settle the chill that had taken up permanent residence in my bones. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, one that felt like it was cracking my face. "Just winded," I managed to croak out. "Think I overdid it." I spent the rest of that day in a daze. I'd go to the window and stare out at the woods. I kept expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. The silence outside was the weirdest part. It was an active, heavy silence. It felt like the woods themselves were holding their breath. The days turned into weeks. That heavy, watchful silence persisted. I know my land, and I know the sounds it makes. The deer that usually cut through the far edge of my property to get to the creek just stopped coming. I'd see their tracks way out on the county road, but nothing on my land. The coyotes, who usually yip and howl most nights, were quiet. It was like someone had drawn a line around my 20 acres, and all the wildlife was respecting it. They were avoiding the area. They knew something was here, something that wasn't me. I never went back to finish that woodpile. Not for a long time. I'd look at the maul leaning against the barn and just feel a cold dread. I started parking my truck right by the front door instead of out by the barn. I found myself checking the locks on the doors and windows 2-3 times a night. I tried to rationalize it. A bear? No, I've seen black bears up here my whole life. They don't walk on two legs like that. Not for that long and that smoothly. They don't have that kind of build. And they sure as hell don't travel in a quiet single-file line with their young. That's what it was. I saw a family, a male, a female, and a juvenile. The thought made my skin crawl. I thought about telling my wife, but the words just wouldn't come. How do you say that? Honey, I think I saw Bigfoot and his family taking a stroll through our back 40. It sounds insane, even to me, so I kept it bottled up. I'd lie awake at night, listening to the unnatural quiet, and replay that moment over and over in my head. The slow, heavy movement in the brush, the sheer size of them, the way they moved through the trees like they owned them. And most of all, that one stopping and turning its head, that look, that knowing, intelligent look that froze the blood in my veins. It's been over a year now. The deer have slowly started coming back. I hear the coyotes again sometimes. The woods have mostly returned to normal, but I haven't. I still get a tightness in my chest when I have to go out to the pole barn after dark. I still find myself scanning the tree line, not for deer, but for any slow, heavy movement in the shadows. I know what people say about Bigfoot. It's a myth, a hoax, a ghost story for campers, but I don't care. I know what I saw that day in early October. I saw something that shouldn't exist, moving through the trees on my own property with a quiet, powerful grace that I will never, ever forget. And I know, with a certainty that sits like a stone in my stomach, that it saw me too. It looked right at me, and in that single silent moment it knew I was there, and I knew without a doubt that I was looking at something I was never meant to see. I haven't been the same since. Story 4. I was up there to hunt ruffed grouse. It was that time of year where the air gets a real bite to it, a warning of the winter that's just around the corner. The leaves were all down, mostly a thick, crunchy carpet on the ground. I liked hunting alone. Always have. There's a peace to it, or there's supposed to be. You're just you and the woods. I had my rifle, my pack with some grub, a sleeping bag and a tarp. That was it. I wasn't planning on anything fancy. Find a good spot, maybe bag a bird or two, camp for the night and head back the next day. I found a decent spot to make camp late in the afternoon under a big old spruce tree. Its branches were thick and gave some good cover. I didn't bother with a tent. I just laid out the tarp, rolled my sleeping bag out on top of it, and that was that. Home for the night. I built a small fire, cooked up some beans and a bit of bacon I had brought, and just sat there listening to the woods settle down for the night. It was quiet, the good kind of quiet. You could hear the little rustles, the wind way up high in the trees, the occasional call of a bird settling in. I felt good. Tired from the hike, but good. It was maybe an hour after I'd finished eating. The light was starting to really fade when I heard the first crack of a branch. It was close. Not a little twig snap, but a proper heavy crack. I was on my feet in a second, my hand on my rifle. I peered into the shadows between the trees, and that's when I saw it. A black bear, maybe 50 feet away, just standing there looking at me. It wasn't a huge one, but any bear up close gets your attention. My heart was going, but it was a normal kind of scared. The kind you get when you know what you're dealing with. I did what you're supposed to do. I started clapping my hands together hard, and I shouted, "Hey, get out of here! Go on!" My voice sounded loud and strange in the quiet. The bear took a step back, swung its head side to side, and then, thank God, it turned and ambled off into the woods. I listened to it crashing through the undergrowth for a minute, and then the sound faded. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were a little shaky, but I felt good. I'd handled it. I remember thinking, well, that was the excitement for the night. I banked the fire, climbed into my sleeping bag, and figured that was that. I fell asleep pretty quick. The cold and the fresh air will do that to you. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was the dead of night, pitch black. The fire was just a pile of dull red embers, giving off no light to speak of. I didn't wake up slowly. It was like a bucket of ice water had been dumped on my soul. 1 second I was asleep. The next I was wide awake, and I knew, with a certainty that was absolute, that something was wrong. It wasn't a thought, it was a feeling, a physical feeling. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck was standing straight up. My skin was prickling all over, like 1,000 tiny needles. My heart wasn't just beating, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful hammering. I was lying on my side, facing away from the woods, and I didn't dare move. I just listened. At first, there was nothing, just the absolute silence of a cold Alaskan night. No wind, no bugs, nothing. And then I heard it, a footstep. It was heavy. Heavy. It wasn't the soft, padded step of the bear. This was a solid, distinct thump, and it was on 2 legs. I know the sound of a man walking. I know the sound of a moose. This wasn't either. It was slower, heavier, more deliberate. Crunch. It was on the dry leaves, maybe 30, 40 feet away, just outside the ring of where my fire had been. The sound was so clear in the silence, it was like it was right next to my ear. I stopped breathing. I just lay there, frozen solid, my eyes wide open, staring at the dark fabric of my sleeping bag, just inches from my face. Snap. A branch, a good-sized one, broke. The sound was sharp, violent. It wasn't an accidental step. It was like whatever it was didn't care about being quiet, or it wanted me to hear it. Then another step. Shuffle, crunch. It was circling me. I could track its movement by sound. It was making a slow, methodical loop around my little camp. Step, pause, step, snap, shuffle. My mind was screaming. Every instinct I had was telling me I was prey. This wasn't the nervous alertness I felt with the bear. This was a deep, primal, gut-wrenching terror. I was shaking so hard, my teeth were chattering, and I had to clamp my jaw shut to stop them. My whole body was trembling uncontrollably. I've been in scary situations before, but I have never ever in my life felt fear like that. It was a cold sickness in my stomach, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I felt small. I felt like a rabbit in a snare, just waiting for the fox. It completed one full circle. I heard its steps go all the way around, from behind me to my left, in front to my right, and then behind me again. The sound was relentless. Heavy, shuffling steps, like something massive and tired but powerful, and then it stopped. Right behind me. I could feel it there. I don't know how, but I could. The air felt thicker, colder. The prickling on my skin was so intense, it felt like I was being stung by bees. I was certain it was looking right at the back of my head. I was going to die. I knew it. This was it. I was going to be dragged out of my sleeping bag and torn apart in the dark. And then I heard it make a sound. It was a low sound, not a growl. It was like a mutter, a deep, guttural, rumbling mutter. Like 2 stones grinding together deep under the earth. It wasn't loud, but I heard it clearly. It was a sound of, I don't know, contemplation, curiosity. It was the most alien and terrifying sound I've ever heard. My mind was racing, a blur of panic. And then, from somewhere in the back of my memory, something surfaced. An old-timer, a Tlingit fella I'd met years before in a diner in Haines, had told me something over a cup of coffee. He was talking about the woods, about things that live deep in them. He said, if you ever found yourself in a bad spot, if you ever felt something out there that wasn't right, you should talk to it. Not yell, not threaten, just talk. Tell it. You mean no harm. He said it was a sign of respect, and sometimes that's all they want. It was the craziest idea in the world. But I had nothing else. I was paralyzed, seconds from what I was sure was my death. I had to try something. I took the tiniest, shakiest breath. My throat was so tight it felt like it was lined with sandpaper. I opened my mouth, and my voice came out as a dry, trembling croak. I didn't even recognize it as my own. I mean no harm, I whispered into the darkness. The words hung in the air. They sounded so stupid, so pathetic. And then the most incredible thing happened. Everything stopped. The muttering sound cut off instantly. The heavy, oppressive feeling of being watched vanished. The forest was silent again. Not just quiet, but dead silent. It was a silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. I lay there, not moving a muscle, barely breathing. I was waiting for it to start again, for the steps to come closer, for the attack. Then I heard a single soft crunch of leaves, and then another, but they were moving away, not walking, trotting, a fast, heavy two-legged trot heading downhill, away from my camp. The sound of it faded with shocking speed. In less than 10 seconds, I couldn't hear it at all. It was just gone. I didn't move. I don't know how long I lay there, curled up in my bag, shaking. The sun started to come up, turning the black to grey, and then to a pale, cold light. I still didn't move. I didn't sit up until the sun was fully over the ridge, flooding the valley with light. My body was stiff and aching from being clenched tight for so long. When I finally got up, my legs were so weak I almost fell over. I didn't look around. I didn't try to find tracks. I didn't want to know. I just packed my stuff as fast as my shaking hands would let me. I rolled the tarp and sleeping bag, stuffed them in my pack, and scattered the ashes of my fire with my boot. I picked up my rifle, and I got out of there. I didn't even look back. I continued my hunt that day. I walked for miles up and down that valley. I even shot a grouse. I did all the things I was supposed to do. But I was on autopilot. My mind was a million miles away, back in that dark camp, listening to those heavy, shuffling steps circling me, the feeling of being prey, the sound of that low, guttural mutter, the way it just left. I've spent 60 years trying to logic it away, a bear walking funny, a moose, a trick of the wind. But I know what I heard. I know the difference. That was no bear. That was no moose. That was something on two legs, something intelligent enough to understand my words, or at least the tone of them, something that chose to leave me alone. I never went back to that specific side valley. I've spent most of my life in the bush, but I've never ever felt that kind of terror again. It marked me. It changed how I see the woods. I still love them, but I know there's a deeper kind of quiet in them, and things that live in that quiet that I can't explain. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. All I know is that I spoke into the darkness, and the darkness listened, and then it left. Story 5. Okay, so this is something I've never really talked about much, because honestly, it sounds crazy. But it happened, and I need to get it out there. This was on April 23rd, 2008. I was driving on the Alcan Highway with my son, who was just a teenager at the time. We were on a road trip, heading back from Alaska into the lower 48, and we were about 14 miles west of the US-Canada border. The Alcan is this long, lonely stretch of road, mostly 2 lanes, cutting through dense forests and rolling hills. It's remote as hell, and you can drive for miles without seeing another car. That day, the sky was overcast, kind of a dull grey, and the air had that chill you get in late April, not quite winter, but not spring either. The trees were mostly evergreens, tall and dark, crowding the roadside, and every so often you'd see a break where a river or a creek cut through. I was behind the wheel, and my son was in the passenger seat, handling the map and keeping an eye out for pavement dips. The road isn't exactly smooth. It's got these dips and rises that can sneak up on you, especially if you're not paying attention. He'd call them out, "Dad, dip ahead," and I'd slow down a bit. Meanwhile, I was scanning the tree line for wildlife. You see all sorts of things out there, moose, bears, sometimes even caribou. It's part of why I love driving that route. It feels wild, untouched, but that day it turned into something else entirely. We'd been driving for a couple of hours, and the rhythm of the road had lulled us into a kind of quiet. The hum of the engine, the sound of the tires on the pavement, it was almost meditative. My son was focused on the road ahead, and I was just taking in the scenery, my eyes darting from side to side. The forest was thick, a wall of green and brown, and the sky was that uniform grey. No sun, just flat light that made everything look a little muted. I remember feeling relaxed, but alert, because you never know what might dart out onto the road. As we started descending a hill, the road curved slightly to the left. It wasn't a sharp turn, just a gentle bend, and I eased off the gas a little. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 3/10 of a mile away, something was crossing the road. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a hiker or someone from a nearby cabin. But as I focused, my brain struggled to make sense of it. This thing was tall, really tall, and it walked upright like a man, but its gait was long and fluid, almost too smooth. Its arms swung naturally at its sides, and the whole thing was a uniform rust-brown color, like those Carhartt coveralls you see construction workers wear. It moved from one side of the road to the other, stepping into the trees on the opposite side, and it did it without any hurry, just a steady, purposeful stride. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. The light wasn't great, but I could see it clearly enough. From the side view, it had a long neck and arms that seemed to hang down almost to its knees. The proportions were off. Too lanky, too stretched out. It didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen, and it sure as hell didn't look human. My first thought was a joke, something I muttered under my breath. Well, there's a Sasquatch. I mean, I'd heard the stories, but I always dismissed them as nonsense, the kind of thing people make up for attention. But here it was, right in front of me, and for a second I almost laughed at how absurd it was. I kept driving, my eyes glued to the spot where it had disappeared. My son hadn't seen it. He was looking down at the map or something. I didn't say anything right away because what would I say? Hey, I think I just saw Bigfoot. It sounded stupid even in my head. But as we got closer to where I'd seen it, I expected to see something. A house, a campsite, anything that would explain it. The road straightened out and we reached the exact spot, but there was nothing. No structures, no tire tracks leading into the woods, no sign of anyone or anything. Just the same dense forest. The trees so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet in. I slowed the car down, almost to a crawl, and my son looked up. "What's wrong?" he asked. I shook my head, not sure how to answer. My heart was starting to beat faster, a dull thump in my chest. I pulled over to the shoulder, the gravel crunching under the tires, and we both stared into the woods. The air felt heavy, quiet. No birds chirping, no wind rustling the leaves, just silence. It was eerie, like the forest was holding its breath. I rolled down my window and the cold air hit my face, but I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no cracking branches, nothing. "Did you see something?" my son asked, his voice low. I told him what I'd seen, keeping my tone casual, but inside I was freaking out. I described the figure, how tall it was, how it moved, the color. He listened, and I could see the skepticism in his eyes, but he didn't laugh. He just looked out the window, scanning the trees. "Maybe it was a bear walking on its hind legs," he suggested, "but I've seen bears do that, and this was different. Bears are clumsy on 2 feet. They wobble, and their arms don't swing like that." This thing moved with a grace that was almost human, but not quite. It was too fluid, too coordinated. We sat there for a few minutes, just watching. I felt a knot in my stomach, a tightness that wouldn't go away. My hands were sweaty on the steering wheel, and I had to wipe them on my jeans. The silence was getting to me. Normally, out in the wilderness, you hear things, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling, but here it was dead quiet. It was like the woods had swallowed whatever it was, and it wasn't giving anything back. I started the car again and pulled back onto the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow in the trees seemed to move. Every branch looked like it might be an arm or a leg. We drove for another hour or so, but the mood in the car had changed. My son was quiet, and I could tell he was thinking about it too. I kept replaying the sighting in my head, The way it crossed the road, how it didn't look back, how it just vanished. The more I thought about it, the more details came back. The rust-brown color wasn't fuzzy or furry. It was smooth, almost like a uniform, and the arms, they were so long, swinging in a rhythm that was too steady, too deliberate. It wasn't running or hurrying. It was just walking, like it had somewhere to be and wasn't bothered by us. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a person in a weird outfit, but who would be out there, miles from anywhere, dressed like that? And why would they disappear into the woods without a trace? The area is remote. There are no trails right there, no roads leading in. It didn't make sense. My mind kept circling back to Bigfoot, but I didn't want to go there. I've always been a practical guy, not one for ghost stories or conspiracy theories. But this was different. It felt real, tangible, and that's what scared me. As we drove, the sky started to darken a bit, the gray turning to a deeper shade. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us, but there was nothing, just the empty road behind us, stretching out into the distance. My son eventually dozed off, but I couldn't relax. Every time we passed a clearing or a gap in the trees, my eyes would dart, searching for movement. I felt on edge, like I'd had too much coffee, but it was just adrenaline wearing off, leaving me jittery. We stopped at a rest area later that day, and I got out to stretch my legs. The air was cold, and I could see my breath. I walked around the car, checking the tires out of habit, but really, I was scanning the tree line again. Nothing. Just the same quiet forest. When we got back on the road, I tried to put it out of my mind, but it was like a splinter in my brain. I couldn't ignore it. That night, when we finally stopped at a motel, I called my wife. I told her about it, and she listened without interrupting. She's always been more open to this kind of stuff than I am. A few days later, she called me back, excited and a little freaked out. She'd been browsing online and found forums where people reported similar sightings in the same area, right along that stretch of the Alcan Highway. Others had seen tall, rust-colored figures crossing the road, disappearing into the woods. Some described it exactly how I did. Long arms, smooth gait, no signs of anything afterward. Reading those accounts, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just me. Other people had seen it too. But even with that, I can't explain what it was. To this day, I have no idea. Was it Bigfoot? I don't know. The word feels silly saying it out loud, but what else could it be? The sheer strangeness of it, how it looked, how it moved, how it vanished, left me unsettled in a way I've never been before. It's made me question what we really know about the world, especially in those remote places where everything feels ancient and untouched. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night or walking in the woods, I'll get a chill, and I'll remember that day on the Alcan Highway. I'll see it in my mind, clear as anything, and I'll wonder what we truly saw out there. Story 6. Okay, so this happened back in September of 2003. I was living in Walcott, New York, which is this small town right near Lake Ontario. It's mostly farmland and woods out there, quiet and kind of isolated, especially once you get away from the main roads. My stepdad had been looking at buying some property in the area, just a few acres between two cornfields with a thick patch of woods in the middle. He wanted to show it to me and his brother, so we all drove out there one afternoon. The sky was that pale, washed-out blue you get in early fall, and the air had that crisp edge to it, like winter wasn't too far off. I remember the leaves were starting to turn, mostly yellows and browns, and everything smelled like damp earth and dying grass. We parked the truck on the gravel shoulder of this narrow road, and my stepdad led us onto the property. He was kind of excited, pointing out where he might build a house or put in a garden. His brother, I guess I should call him my uncle for simplicity, even though he's not blood related, was just kind of nodding along, hands in his pockets. I was 16 at the time, and honestly, I was bored. I'd rather have been hanging out with friends or something, but my stepdad insisted I come along. So I was trailing behind them, kicking at rocks and looking at my shoes. We walked through this open field that was all overgrown with weeds and tall grass, crunching under our feet. The woods ahead were dense, mostly oak and maple trees, with shadows pooling between the trunks. My stepdad was talking about the soil quality or something, but I wasn't really listening. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. We were maybe 50 yards from the edge of the woods, and he just froze, staring into the trees. His face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer right away. He just kept staring, and then he muttered, "What the hell is that?" I followed his gaze, and at first, I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows. But then something moved. It was deep in the woods, between two fields, where the light was kind of dim. There was this tall, thin shape standing there, and it was white. Not bright white, but like a pale, almost grayish white, like old bone or something. It had this long, stringy hair that looked white too, and it was just standing there, perfectly still. My stepdad whispered, "It's watching us." I felt this cold knot form in my stomach. My heart started beating faster, and I could hear my own breathing getting shallow. My stepdad turned to us and said we needed to get back to the truck. He was trying to stay calm, but I could see his hands were shaking. We didn't run, but we walked fast, not looking back until we were safely in the truck with the doors locked. My stepdad was breathing hard, and he kept glancing in the rearview mirror like he expected something to follow us. He told us he'd seen it during his first tour of the property a couple of days earlier, but he didn't say anything because he thought maybe it was a trick of the light or something. But now, seeing it again, he knew it was real. On the drive back to his house, we were all quiet. My uncle was the one who broke the silence. He said, "We have to go back. We can't just leave it like that." I didn't want to go back. I was scared shitless. But curiosity was starting to itch at me. What was that thing? A bear? A person? But it didn't move like any animal I'd ever seen. My stepdad was reluctant, but he agreed. He said if we went, we'd do it carefully and we'd bring a camera. So we stopped at his place, grabbed an old digital camera, one of those chunky ones from the early 2000s, and headed back out. The whole time, my stomach was in knots. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long shadows, and the air felt colder. We parked in the same spot, but this time, we didn't get out right away. We sat in the truck for a few minutes, just watching the woods. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind, just this heavy silence. Finally, my stepdad said, "Okay, let's go, but stay close, and if I say run, we run." We got out and started walking toward the field again. This time we moved slowly, staying low in the grass. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. Every little sound made me jump, a twig snapping, the rustle of leaves. I kept scanning the trees, but I didn't see anything at first. We reached the edge of the field, about 200 yards from where we'd seen it earlier. My stepdad pointed, and there it was, the same tall, white-haired thing, standing in the same spot between the trees. It was about 7 feet tall, maybe a bit more, and it was thin, really thin, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. Its head was pointed, almost conical, and its face was darker than the rest of its body, like it was shadowed or maybe covered in darker skin or hair. It wasn't moving much, just swaying slightly, like it was rooted to the spot. But then it started pacing back and forth, slow and deliberate, like it was patrolling or something. It didn't make a sound. We crouched down in the grass, trying to stay hidden. My stepdad fumbled with the camera, but his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't get a steady shot. I remember the camera lens clicking, but the thing was too far away, and the light was fading. We watched it for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. It kept moving back and forth, and then it stopped and turned toward us. That's when the real terror hit. It was looking right at us, I could feel its eyes on me even from that distance. It wasn't aggressive or anything. It didn't charge or make noise, but the way it watched us was intense, like it was studying us. I felt frozen, like I couldn't move even if I wanted to. My skin was crawling, and I had this cold sweat breaking out all over my body. My uncle whispered, "It knows we're here." His voice was tight with fear. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, and I was gripping the grass so hard my knuckles hurt. The creature just stood there, watching us, and then it slowly raised one arm, long and bony, and pointed toward the woods behind it. I don't know if it was a warning or what, but it sent a chill down my spine. Then, without any hurry, it turned and walked deeper into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. It moved smoothly, almost gracefully, but there was something unnatural about it, like it didn't quite belong in this world. As soon as it was gone, we all let out breaths we didn't realize we'd been holding. My stepdad stood up, his legs wobbly, and said we should check the area. I didn't want to, but I followed him and my uncle into the woods. The ground where it had been standing was matted down, like something heavy had been pressing on the grass and leaves. But when we looked for footprints, there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing. It was like it had never been there, except for that flattened patch. We searched around for a bit, but the light was almost gone, and the woods were getting darker. Every shadow seemed to move, and I kept thinking I saw something out of the corner of my eye. We hurried back to the truck, not saying much. When we got in, my stepdad just sat there for a minute, staring at the steering wheel. Then he started the engine and drove us home. None of us talked about it on the way back. When we got to his house, we went inside, and my stepdad poured himself a drink. His hands were still shaking. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, feeling numb. My uncle was pacing back and forth, muttering about what it could have been, but we didn't have any answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing watching us, its dark face, those pale eyes, if it had eyes, and the way it moved. I kept thinking about how it didn't leave any footprints, how it just vanished. It didn't make any sense. Over the next few days, we talked about going back with more people or better equipment, but we never did. My stepdad decided not to buy the property, and we avoided that area altogether. Sometimes when I'm out in the woods or even just driving through the countryside, I think about it and get that same cold feeling in my gut. I've never seen anything like it since, and I still don't know what it was. But I know what I saw, and I know it was real, and that's enough to keep me up at night, even all these years later. Story 7. It was a Tuesday. My friend, let's just call him Mark, had been pestering me for weeks to go on an overnight kayak trip. We'd done day trips before, but this was our first time planning to camp on a gravel bar. The weather was perfect, hot but not suffocating, and the river was low and calm. We put in around 2 in the afternoon, just the two of us. The plan was simple: paddle for a few hours, find a nice secluded gravel bar to set up camp, have some beers, cook dinner over a fire, and just unwind. It sounded like heaven. Everything was heaven, right up until it wasn't. We found a perfect spot around dusk. It was a wide, flat bar of pale grey gravel and sand, nestled in a bend of the river. On our side, the bank was a steep, tree-covered slope. Directly across from us, maybe 60, 70 yards away, the opposite shore was a sheer limestone cliff, maybe 40 feet high, with a thick forest crowding its top. It felt isolated, but in a good way, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones and unwinds all the city knots. We pulled the kayaks up high onto the gravel, set up the little 2-man tent, and got a small fire going as the light started to really fade. The sky turned this deep, bruised purple, and the first stars were coming out. We were just sitting there, not talking much, just listening to the fire crackle and the water gently lapping at the gravel. It was so peaceful I almost felt guilty for having it. That peace shattered in about half a second. It started with a scream, not a human scream. Nothing like that. It's hard to even describe the sound. It was piercing, like it was shredding the air itself, but it was also guttural and deep, like it was coming from a barrel chest. It wasn't a screech or a yell, it was a full-on, hair-raising, soul-vibrating roar that echoed off the cliff face across the river. It was so loud, so sudden, that both of us physically jolted. I spilled my beer all over my lap and didn't even notice. We just stared at each other, eyes wide, the fire suddenly feeling tiny and useless. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered, his voice tight. Before I could even form a thought, another one answered it. This one came from further down the river, to our left. It was slightly different, a bit higher in pitch, but just as powerful. And then the first one roared again, closer this time. The sound didn't just hit our ears, I felt it in my teeth, in my ribs. It was an aggressive, challenging sound. It wasn't some random animal noise. It felt directed. Then the splashing started, heavy, deliberate splashing from the opposite bank, not like a deer stepping into the water. This was the sound of something big moving through the shallows, something with weight. We could hear cracking sounds too, the sharp snap of branches, not little twigs, but thick wrist-sized stuff breaking. "Get the lights," I said, and my voice was a shaky mess. We both fumbled for our flashlights. We had these decent LED ones, not super tactical, but bright enough. My hands were trembling so bad, I almost dropped mine. I clicked it on and swept the beam across the river toward the splashing. At first, I saw nothing but the dark wall of trees and the pale rock of the cliff. Then the beam caught movement. Something was moving along the water's edge, staying just inside the tree line. My light landed on it and my brain just stuttered. It was tall, so damn tall. It was standing upright on two legs, and it had to be over 8 feet easy. Its body was massive, built thick through the shoulders and chest, and covered in what looked like dark, wet hair. It was the color of wet bark. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, and they swung as it moved. It wasn't running, it was walking, but with a powerful, deliberate stride, like it knew exactly where it was going. It was maybe 50 yards away, directly opposite us. "Do you see that?" Mark hissed, his own flashlight beam joining mine, illuminating the thing more clearly. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my mouth hanging open. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk like that. They don't have that kind of profile. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real. It stopped walking. It was half hidden by a tangle of river cane, but its upper body was visible, and it turned its head. I couldn't see any distinct features, no eyes reflecting the light, just a dark, shapeless head atop that huge body. But I knew it was looking at us. I could feel it. The air went dead still. Then it roared again. This one was different. It wasn't just a challenge, it was pure, raw aggression. It opened its mouth, a darker patch in the dark of its face, and this sound erupted that was so loud it felt like a physical blow. The roar echoed off the cliff, multiplying, coming at us from all directions. It was so deep it vibrated in my gut, a primal frequency that screamed danger. It was the single most terrifying sound I have ever heard in my life. That's when the pure, ice-cold terror set in. This wasn't curiosity. This thing was pissed off, and we were sitting ducks on this open gravel bar. "We have to go. Now," Mark said, and he was already moving, kicking sand onto the fire. My body felt numb, but adrenaline kicked in. We scrambled, abandoning the tent, our sleeping bags, the cooler. All we grabbed were our life jackets, our paddles, and we dragged the kayaks into the water. The splashing and cracking from the other side started up again, keeping pace with us as we struggled to get in. I fell into my kayak, the cold water soaking through my clothes, and I didn't even care. I just started paddling. We pushed out into the main current, heading downstream, away from the thing. The moon wasn't full, but it gave enough light to see the silvery path of the river. We didn't use our flashlights anymore. We were too scared to give away our position, even though it clearly already knew exactly where we were. For the first 10 minutes, we just paddled like maniacs, not talking, just the sound of our paddles dipping and pulling and our ragged breathing. The river was quiet except for us. I kept looking back over my shoulder, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't see anything on the banks, just dark, impenetrable walls of trees. Then we heard it again, the heavy, rhythmic splashing. It was on our right now, the same side we'd just camped on. It was moving through the forest, parallel to us, keeping pace. We could hear it crashing through the undergrowth, a relentless, pounding sound. It was following us. This is the part that really gets me, that still gives me nightmares. It wasn't just observing us, it was herding us. It felt deliberate, like it was pushing us downriver, out of its space. We'd slow down for a second to catch our breath, and the crashing would get closer, more urgent, and we'd start paddling hard again. It was playing a terrifying game of cat and mouse, and we were the mice. We came around a wider bend, where the river opened up a bit. The trees on the right bank fell back, revealing a shallow, muddy flat that extended maybe 20 yards from the water's edge to the forest. And that's when we saw it clearly for the first and only time. It stepped out of the tree line and into the open. The moonlight wasn't great, but it was enough. It stood there, fully upright, in the middle of that muddy flat. It was even bigger than I'd thought. Its body was immense, powerfully built, and it was just standing there, facing the river, facing us. It didn't move. It just watched us as we paddled past. The sheer size of it, the sheer presence, was overwhelming. It was like seeing a mountain get up and walk. I remember the way its arms hung, so long that its knuckles seemed to brush its mid-thigh. I remember the way its head sat on its shoulders, no visible neck, just this powerful dark mass. And then, from the woods behind it, another roar sounded out, and then a third from further back on the opposite bank. They weren't in unison, they overlapped, one starting before the other finished, creating a horrible, dissonant chorus. There wasn't just one, there were multiple. That was the moment any last shred of doubt or rationalization left me. We weren't dealing with a lone, curious animal. We were in a territory we were not welcome in, and we were being actively, forcefully expelled. We paddled for what felt like an eternity. My arms and shoulders were on fire, a deep, screaming burn. My back was a solid knot of pain. Every shadow on the bank was that thing. Every rustle of leaves was it coming for us. We were cold, wet, and utterly terrified. We didn't stop. We couldn't. The sounds of it following us eventually faded, but we didn't trust the silence. We just kept going, driven by pure animal fear. The sky eventually began to lighten from black to deep blue, then to a pale, watery grey. Dawn. We were exhausted, barely able to lift our paddles. We saw a designated campsite up ahead on the left, a proper one with a picnic table and a cleared area. It felt safer, more exposed. We dragged our kayaks onto the bank and just collapsed on the ground, shivering from cold and adrenaline crash. We sat there for a long time, not speaking, just watching the sun come up and turn the river to gold. The world looked normal again, beautiful even, but it felt false. The silence was different now. It felt watchful. After we'd gathered some semblance of ourselves, Mark looked at me and said, "We have to go back." "What? Why?" "The car keys," he said, his face pale. "They're in the tent." My heart sank. He was right. We had to go back upriver. We were too exhausted to paddle, so we started walking, sticking to the riverbank, following the trail that ran alongside it. It took us a couple of hours, our senses on a razor's edge the whole time. Every little sound made us jump. We found our gravel bar. The tent was still there, sagging and wet with dew. The fire pit was a mess of wet ash and sand. Everything was exactly as we'd left it in our panic. It felt eerie, like a museum exhibit of our own terror. We got the keys and were about to turn and leave, to get the hell out of there and never come back when I saw them. In the soft, wet mud at the very edge of the gravel bar, right where the trees started on our side, were footprints. They were huge, I mean massive. I wear a size 12 shoe, and I put my foot next to one of them. It was easily twice as long and twice as wide. The impressions were deep, showing a clear, human-like shape with 5 toes, but they were splayed wide, and leading away from the footprints into the woods was a path of destruction. Saplings, as thick as my forearm, were snapped in half, not cut, but broken, their white splintered cores pointing back the way they'd come. The undergrowth was flattened. It had been right here, on our side of the river. After we'd left, it had walked right through our campsite. We didn't say a word. We just looked at each other, grabbed the keys and ran. We hiked back to the car in a record time I'm sure we'll never beat, threw the kayaks on the roof rack with shaking hands, and got in. We drove for an hour before we even spoke. I've turned it over and over in my head. A bear? No. The walking, the size, the footprints, the sounds, it doesn't fit. A person in a suit, out there, in the middle of the night, herding kayakers? Why? It makes even less sense. The only thing that fits, the only thing that explains the deliberate, aggressive way it pushed us out, the intelligence in that act, is that we were in a place we didn't belong. We were trespassing, and we were told to leave. I haven't been kayaking since. I look at remote rivers on a map now, and I don't see beauty or peace. I see a border, a line you don't cross. I still hear that roar sometimes when it's quiet, and my blood runs cold all over again. We didn't just see something we couldn't explain. We were interacted with, we were dealt with, and I have no idea what to do with that. Story 8. Okay, so this is something I've never really talked about with anyone outside my family. And even then, it's mostly been brushed under the rug. But it's been weighing on me for years, and I guess writing it down might help, or maybe just get it out there so I'm not carrying it alone anymore. This happened back in October of 1993, when I was in my early 20s. My brother and I were really close back then. We'd grown up hunting and fishing together in the woods around our hometown, and it was one of those things that just felt like part of who we were. That day, we decided to go deer hunting on this forested land along the ridge behind our town. It was a spot we'd been to before, but never too deep in, because the terrain got rough and it was easy to get turned around if you weren't careful. The morning started out like any other hunting trip. We woke up before dawn. The air was chilly with that crisp autumn bite that makes your breath fog up in little clouds. I remember pulling on my old camouflage jacket, the one with the torn pocket I kept meaning to sew up, and lacing up my boots that were still damp from the last time we'd been out. My brother was already in the kitchen, sipping coffee and checking his rifle, a Remington 700 he'd saved up for months to buy. He was always the more impulsive one, the kind of guy who'd take a shot without thinking twice, whereas I liked to take my time, watch the woods, and just be out there. We didn't talk much that morning. It was comfortable silence, the kind you only have with someone you've known your whole life. We drove out to the trailhead in his beat-up truck, the radio playing some staticky country station, and parked near the old logging road. The sun was just starting to peek over the hills, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest was thick with pines and oaks, their leaves turning all shades of red and gold, and the ground was carpeted with fallen leaves that crunched under our boots. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear every little sound, the rustle of a squirrel, the distant call of a crow, the wind whispering through the branches. We'd packed light, just our rifles, some water, and a few snacks, planning to be out for most of the day. For the first couple of hours, everything felt normal. We moved slowly, sticking to the game trails we knew, keeping our eyes peeled for any sign of deer. I remember the smell of damp earth and pine needles, and the way the cold seeped into my fingers, even through my gloves. My brother was ahead of me, his footsteps steady, and I could see his breath in the air. We didn't talk much, just occasional whispers about which way to go or if we heard something. I was starting to relax into the rhythm of it, the way you do when you're out in the woods and everything feels familiar. Then, after about 2 hours of walking, we came to this clearing. It wasn't huge, maybe the size of a football field, ringed by tall trees and with a small stream trickling through one side. The sun was higher now, lighting up the grass and making the dew sparkle. We paused at the edge, scanning the area for movement. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear or something, but it was too tall, too upright. It was standing at the far edge of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away, just watching us. It was dark brown, almost black in places, and covered in thick, shaggy hair that looked matted and dirty. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung down by its sides. Its face was shadowed, but I could make out that it was looking right at us, not moving, just staring. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I froze, my rifle still slung over my shoulder, and I remember my mouth going dry. I glanced at my brother, and he was staring too, his eyes wide. I could see his knuckles white where he was gripping his rifle. I thought maybe he'd back away slowly, like we always did with wildlife, but instead, without any warning, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the clearing, sharp and loud, and I flinched like I'd been hit myself. The creature, whatever it was, jerked back, like it had been struck, and let out this roar that I can still hear in my dreams. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. It was deep and guttural, full of pain and anger, and it seemed to vibrate through the air, making the hairs on my arms stand up. For a second it just stood there, and I saw its eyes, dark and intelligent, glaring right at us, before it turned and vanished into the trees so fast it was like it had never been there. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. As soon as it was gone, I snapped. I turned on my brother, my hands shaking, and I started shouting, "What the hell did you do that for? Are you insane?" My voice was raw, and I could feel the heat in my face. He just stood there, his rifle still raised, looking stunned. He mumbled something about it being a threat, but I wasn't hearing it. All I could think was that he'd shot at something we didn't understand, something that might not have even been dangerous. The fear was mixing with this overwhelming anger, and I kept yelling, "We don't know what that was. You could have gotten us killed." He didn't say much after that, just lowered his rifle and stared at the spot where the creature had been. The clearing was dead silent again, but it felt different now, heavy, like the air was charged with something bad. I could smell the gunpowder from the shot, and it made me sick to my stomach. My legs felt weak, and I had to lean against a tree to steady myself. I kept expecting the creature to come back, or for something else to happen, but nothing did. The woods were just quiet. We stood there for what felt like forever, not talking, just breathing hard. Finally, I muttered that we should keep moving, not because I wanted to hunt anymore, but because I didn't want to stay in that clearing. My brother nodded, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. We started walking again, but the easy silence was gone, replaced by this thick tension that made every step feel awkward. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those dark eyes watching us from the trees. Every little sound, a twig snapping, a bird fluttering, made me jump. My heart was still racing, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back, even though the air was cold. For the next few hours, we trudged through the woods, but it was pointless. We weren't hunting, we were just going through the motions. I'd see a deer track and not even care. My mind was stuck on that creature, the way it moved, the sound it made, the way it looked at us. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering what it was. A bear? No, bears don't stand that tall or move that fast. Bigfoot? I'd heard stories, but I never believed them, not really. But now I didn't know what to believe, and I was so mad at my brother. Every time I looked at him, I felt this knot in my stomach. He'd always been reckless, but this was different. This felt like a violation, like he'd crossed a line we couldn't come back from. We didn't speak the whole time. Not when we stopped to drink water, not when we took a break to eat a granola bar. He'd try to catch my eye once or twice, but I'd look away. I could see he was shaken too. His hands were trembling, and he kept wiping his face like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream, but I didn't care. All I could think was that he'd ruined everything. That trip was supposed to be about bonding, about spending time together like we used to. But now, it was just this ugly memory. As the afternoon wore on, the sun started to dip lower, casting long shadows that made the woods feel even creepier. We decided to head back early, because neither of us had the stomach for it anymore. The walk back to the truck was the longest of my life. Every step I was on edge, listening for any sound that wasn't right. I kept imagining that roar echoing through the trees, and I'd clench my fists, my anger simmering. My brother walked a few feet behind me, and I could feel his presence like a weight. Once I thought I heard something moving off to our left, a heavy rustling, and I froze, my heart in my throat. But it was just a deer bounding away, and I felt stupid for being so scared. When we finally got back to the truck, the relief was overwhelming, but it didn't last. We loaded our gear in silence, and the drive home was just as bad. No radio, no talking, just the hum of the engine and the sound of the wind whistling through the cracked window. I stared out at the passing trees, my mind racing. What if that thing was still out there, hurt? What if it was following us? And why did my brother have to shoot? I wanted to ask him, to scream at him again, but I didn't. The words were stuck in my throat. We got home as the sun was setting, and we went our separate ways without a word. I went straight to my room and just sat on the bed, still in my hunting clothes, feeling numb. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature, its dark form, the way it flinched, the roar. I'd wake up sweating, my heart pounding. The next day, I avoided my brother, and he avoided me. It was like that for weeks, then months, then years. We never talked about what happened, not really. He tried to bring it up once, a few years later, but I shut him down. I couldn't forgive him for it. That trip was supposed to be about trust, but he'd broken it in a way I couldn't fix. I never went hunting with him again, not that fall, not ever. We drifted apart after that, and now, decades later, we're still distant. Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different if he hadn't shot, if we just backed away and left it alone. But he did, and that moment changed everything. I don't know what that creature was, if it was a Bigfoot or something else, and I probably never will. But I do know that it taught me a lesson about fear and respect for the unknown. You don't just shoot at something you don't understand. You don't take that risk. And now, whenever I'm in the woods, I'm always watching, always listening, half expecting to see those dark eyes again. But I never have, and part of me is glad because I don't know what I'd do if I did. Story 9. My older brother, he was about 13 at the time, and me, we'd hooked up with our friend from down the road. We didn't have much to do, so we decided to head out to the old railroad tracks that cut through the woods behind our house. Those tracks hadn't been used in years. They were all rusty and overgrown with weeds, and the ties were splintered and dark from rain and rot. It was our favorite spot to play because it felt like our own little world, away from the grown-ups and their boring chores. We started off just messing around, throwing rocks at tin cans we'd set up on the rails, seeing who could knock them off first. The sound of the rocks clinking against the metal was sharp in the quiet, and every now and then we'd hear the buzz of insects or the distant call of a bird. But mostly it was just us, laughing and shoving each other, not a care in the world. I remember the smell of the creosote from the railroad ties mixing with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. My t-shirt was sticking to my back with sweat, and I could feel the grit on my skin from where I'd wiped my hands on my jeans. After a while, we got bored with the cans and started exploring along the tracks, kicking up gravel and looking for interesting bugs. or maybe some old bottle caps. The woods on either side were dense, a wall of green that seemed to swallow the light. It was cooler in the shade, but there was this uneasy feeling starting to creep in, like we weren't alone. I remember my brother saying something about how quiet it had gotten. No birds, no nothing. But we brushed it off. Kids don't think too much about stuff like that. Then out of nowhere, this sound ripped through the air. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not an animal I knew, not a person. It was this high-pitched screech that felt like it was drilling right into my skull. It was so loud and piercing that I flinched and covered my ears without thinking. My heart immediately started hammering in my chest, and I could feel this cold sweat break out on my forehead. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. My friend's face went pale, and my brother's mouth was hanging open. For a second, we just stood there, not moving, not breathing. The screech echoed away, but the silence that followed was even worse. It was heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then, from the edge of the woods, maybe 30 feet away, something moved. I turned my head slowly, and that's when I saw it. This massive thing, taller than any man I'd ever seen, standing there just beyond the tree line. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that looked matted and dirty, like it had been rolling in mud. Its face, God, I'll never forget that face, was somewhere between human and ape. It had these deep-set eyes that seemed almost intelligent, and a broad, flat nose, but the mouth was kind of slack, like it was as shocked as we were. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. I was just staring, taking in every detail. The way its chest moved as it breathed, the way its hands, more like paws with long fingers, hung at its sides. It didn't make a sound now, just stood there, looking right back at us. I could see the muscles in its shoulders tense, and for a split second I thought it might charge or something. But it didn't. It seemed frozen too, like we'd caught each other off guard. Time stretched out, and I know people say that, but it really did. It felt like we were stuck like that for minutes, but later we all agreed it was probably only 15 seconds or so. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a bear? No, bears don't stand like that, and they don't have faces that look almost human. This thing was upright, balanced on 2 legs, and its proportions were all wrong for an animal. The hair on its arms was longer, almost shaggy, and I could see patches where it was thinner, showing dark skin underneath. Then my brother gasped, and that broke the spell. The creature let out this low grunt, and its eyes widened like it was just as scared as we were. That's when the panic hit me like a physical blow. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my hands started trembling. I didn't think, I just turned and ran. We all did, screaming at the top of our lungs, not looking back. The sound of our feet pounding on the gravel and dirt was deafening, and I could hear my own breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't remember much about the run home, just flashes. Tripping over a root and scraping my knee, the sting of it barely registering because the fear was so overwhelming. My brother was ahead of me, his back a blur, and our friend was right beside me. His face twisted in terror. We didn't stop, didn't slow down, even when my lungs felt like they were on fire. All I could think was that thing was behind us, chasing us, even though I never heard anything following. The woods whizzed by in a green-brown streak, and the only thing in my head was the image of that creature, burned into my mind like a brand. When we burst out of the trees and into our backyard, we collapsed on the grass, heaving and crying. My mom came running out of the house, her face white with worry, asking what happened. We were all talking at once, babbling about a monster, a big hairy thing by the tracks. She tried to calm us down, but we were too shaken. I remember sitting on the porch steps, my whole body trembling, and my brother kept saying, "Did you see it? Did you see its face?" Over and over, we compared what we saw, and it was the same, the height, the hair, the face. There was no doubt in any of our minds. The rest of that day is a blur of sitting inside, jumping at every noise, and my parents trying to make sense of it. They thought maybe it was a bear or a prank, but we knew it wasn't. That evening, our friend's mom came to pick him up, and he was quiet the whole time, not meeting our eyes. He didn't come back to play for weeks after that, and when he did, he never wanted to go near the woods again. I can't blame him. I felt the same way. Even now, all these years later, that image is crystal clear in my head. I've never been able to explain what it was, and I've spent a lot of nights lying awake, wondering if we imagined it or if it was real. But 3 of us saw the same thing, and the fear we felt was too raw to be made up. Sometimes when I'm out in the woods or hear a strange noise, my heart still races, and I'm right back there, a kid frozen in terror, staring at something that shouldn't exist. I don't know what it was, and I guess I never will, but I know what I saw, and it stuck with me for life. Story 10. All right, I've never really typed this out before. I've told a couple of people over the years, the ones I thought might actually get it, but most just nod and look at me like I'm trying to spin a campfire tale. I'm not. This is the God's honest truth of what happened to me and my friends one winter in Wayne County back in 1972. I still live around here, but I don't go to Springwood Park anymore. Haven't for a long, long time. It was February. The kind of cold that doesn't just nip at you, it sinks right into your bones and sets up shop. The air was so sharp it hurt to breathe it in. We'd had a big snow a couple days before, then a clear night that froze everything solid. The world was just white and grey and silent. That morning I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I was maybe 17, feeling that restless energy you get when you're cooped up inside for too long. I told my mum I was just going out for a bit, pulled on my thickest boots, my coat, a hat pulled down over my ears, and started walking with no real destination in mind. I ended up near the park, down by the old railroad tracks that cut along the edge of it. The snow was pristine out there, no tire tracks, no footprints except for the occasional deer or rabbit. The sun was out, but it was useless, just a bright coin in a pale sky that gave no heat. I walked along the rails for a while, the crunch of my boots on the snow-packed gravel the only sound. After a bit, I got tired. The cold just saps your energy, you know? I saw this big metal box, like some kind of utility housing for the railroad, off to the side of the tracks. It was clear of snow on top, so I figured I'd sit for a minute, catch my breath, and just watch my own clouds of breath puff out in front of me. That's when I saw them. At first, my brain didn't even register what I was looking at. They were footprints, but they were all wrong. They were barefoot, human-shaped, but just barefoot in the snow. I remember just staring, my mind trying to catch up. It was so bitterly cold. My face was numb. The idea of someone walking around with no shoes was insane. It was dangerous. I got off the box and knelt down to get a closer look, the cold from the ground immediately seeping through the knees of my jeans. The prints were big. Not gigantic, not like something from a movie, but bigger than mine, and I wore a size 10, maybe a 12, 13. It was hard to tell with the edges a little melted, but they were distinct. I could see the ball of the foot, the heel, even the individual toes. The toes were long. That's a detail that stuck with me all these years. They weren't splayed out wide, but they were long, like fingers almost. They came from the woods on one side of the tracks, crossed directly over the 2 rails, and disappeared into the thicket on the other side, the side that led deeper into the park. The stride was huge. I remember putting my own boot down next to one of the prints and seeing the distance between them was way more than my normal step. This thing, whatever it was, had been moving with purpose. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was a different kind of cold. It was the cold of something being fundamentally off. My heart started thumping in my chest, a hard, slow beat. I stood up and looked into the woods where the tracks led. The trees were a tangled wall of grey branches and dark green pines, heavy with snow. It was absolutely still. No birds, no rustling, nothing. The quiet felt heavy, like a blanket smothering everything. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to follow those prints. It wasn't even a question. It felt reckless, like it would be trespassing, like I'd be stepping into a place I wasn't supposed to be. I just stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just staring into that woods, my skin crawling. I kept thinking about my feet, how they were bundled in thick wool socks and leather boots, and how they were still cold. The idea of bare skin on that frozen ground, on that snow, it made me feel sick. That feeling, that dread, it wasn't new. It was the same feeling we'd all had a few months before in the fall. We'd been camping in the park, me and 3 of my buddies. We'd done it a dozen times before. It was our spot. But that night was different. We'd set up our tent near a small creek, not far from one of the old picnic shelters. We had a fire going, hot dogs, the whole deal. It was a perfect fall night, crisp but not cold. Then, as it got fully dark, the woods got quiet. Not just the normal night quiet, but a dead quiet. The crickets stopped. The frogs in the creek stopped. It was like someone had thrown a switch. We all noticed it, but nobody said anything at first. You just get a feeling, you know, that prickle on the back of your neck like you're being watched. We were sitting around the fire, talking quieter than usual, when we heard the first scream. It came from the ridge above us, maybe a couple 100 yards away. It wasn't a fox or a bobcat. I've heard those. This was different. It was deep, guttural, but it had this piercing, almost human quality to it that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. It wasn't a short bark or a yelp. It was a long, drawn-out scream that echoed through the hollow. It was full of rage, or pain, or both. I can't describe it any better than that. It was awful. It was the kind of sound that bypasses your brain and goes straight to the lizard part of your spine that tells you to run. We all froze, just locked up, staring at each other in the firelight. Our eyes were wide. One of my friends, his name was Mike, he whispered, "What the hell was that?" None of us had an answer. For a few minutes there was nothing. Just that heavy, waiting silence. We were all listening so hard my ears started to ache. Then it came again. Closer this time, a lot closer. The same deep, throat-ripping scream, but now I could hear this wetness to it, like a roar from a chest too big for its own good. It was answered almost immediately by another one from a different direction, further off to our left. They were communicating. That was the terrifying part. It wasn't just random noise. They were talking to each other, and we were in the middle. Panic just flooded through us. It was pure, undiluted fear. We scrambled into our tent, zipping it up, as if that flimsy sheet of nylon was going to do anything. We were all breathing heavy, just terrified kids in the dark. We had a flashlight, but we were too scared to turn it on. We just sat there in the pitch black, listening. That's when the sounds started moving around us. We could hear heavy footsteps, not the light, quick steps of a deer. These were thumps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the leaves and fallen branches. It would walk a circle around our camp just outside the ring of firelight. We could hear it stop sometimes, and we'd hear this low, rumbling breathing. It was so deep, we could feel it vibrating in the ground. One of my friends started crying, just quiet, helpless sobs. I was shaking so bad my teeth were chattering. I remember the smell. It's hard to describe, but it was a mix of wet dog, but muskier, and something else. Something rotten, like old meat. The smell got so strong it made my eyes water. The screaming started again, right on the edge of the clearing. It was so loud it felt like it was inside my head. That was it. We couldn't take it anymore. We had to get out of there. We couldn't stay in that tent. Mike whispered, "The roof. The cabin roof." There was an old boarded-up maintenance cabin about 50 yards away. It had a low, slanted roof we'd climbed onto before to mess around. It was our only chance. The idea was to get up high, where it couldn't get to us as easily. We unzipped the tent flap and just bolted. We didn't grab anything. We just ran for our lives through the dark, tripping over roots, our hearts hammering in our throats. I've never been so scared in my life. I didn't look back, I just focused on that cabin. We scrambled up onto the roof, pulling each other up, our hands slipping on the cold, gritty shingles. We huddled together in the middle of that roof, backs to each other, staring out into the blackness of the woods. The forest was still frozen in that unnatural silence. We could still smell that awful smell, and we could still hear the footsteps moving slowly through the trees around the cabin. It knew where we were. We sat there for hours, just shaking, waiting for the sun to come up. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made us jump. We didn't talk. There was nothing to say. We were just four kids, completely and utterly terrified of the dark and what was in it. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical pressure. When the first hint of grey finally showed in the east, the sounds stopped, the smell faded. The normal sounds of the woods, the birds and the squirrels, slowly started up again. It was over. We climbed down from that roof, our muscles stiff and aching from cold and fear. We went back to our campsite. Our tent was still standing. Our stuff was still there. Nothing was touched. But the ground around our camp was a mess of huge, deep footprints. They were the same shape I'd seen months later in the snow, big, barefoot with long toes. We packed up our stuff in a frantic hurry and got the hell out of that park. We never camped there again. We barely even talked about it with each other. It was too big, too scary. And standing there on those railroad tracks months later, looking at those fresh, barefoot prints in the sub-freezing snow, it all came rushing back. That smell, those screams, the feeling of being hunted. This thing, whatever it was still here. It had walked right across this track not long before I got there. It was real. It wasn't just a bad dream we'd all shared. I didn't follow the tracks. I turned around and I walked home fast. My heart didn't stop pounding until I was back inside my own house with the door locked behind me. I'm an old man now. I've had a whole life since then. But I've never forgotten that day on the tracks or that night on the cabin roof. The fear is still there, like a fossil preserved in my memory. I still don't know what it was. I don't want to know. Some things you're just not meant to follow. Some things you just have to leave in the woods. Story 11. It was the fall of 1978. I was 14 years old. We lived in Calhoun County, South Carolina, and my dad was a big hunter. He'd been taking me out since I was old enough to hold a .22, teaching me how to track, how to be quiet, how to respect the woods. That particular morning, we were heading into a place everyone called the Devil's Orchard. It's a nasty piece of swampland, thick with cypress trees and water that looks like black coffee. It's easy to get turned around in there, and the air always feels heavy, even on a cool day. We left the house hours before the sun was even thinking about coming up. I remember the cold of the vinyl seat in my dad's old pickup truck seeping through my jeans. I had my shotgun, a single-shot 20 gauge that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I was proud of that gun. My dad didn't say much on the drive, just sipped his coffee from a thermos. That was normal for him. He was a man of few words, especially in the morning. We parked on a dirt track that was more two ruts than a road, and we started walking. The beam from my flashlight bounced around, catching the gnarled knees of cypress trees and Spanish moss hanging down like grey cobwebs. The sounds were already starting. The frogs and the insects making that constant droning buzz that you get used to after a while. It smells like mud and decay in there, a wet, rotten smell that gets right up your nose. My dad and I had a system. We'd split up once we got to a certain spot, a kind of dry island in the middle of all that water. He'd go north, I'd go east. We'd agreed to meet back at the truck by 10 o'clock if we didn't get anything. He clapped me on the shoulder, a solid, heavy pat. "Be safe. Keep your wits about you," he said, his voice a low grumble. Then he turned and melted into the trees, the sound of his footsteps getting swallowed up real quick. I found my spot. It was a little hummock of ground, drier than the surrounding area, with a big fallen log I could use as a rest. I sat down with my back against it, the dampness immediately starting to soak into my coat. I broke open my shotgun, slid a shell into the chamber, and clicked it shut. The sound was loud and final in the quiet. Then I just waited. That's most of hunting, you know. It's just waiting. Your mind starts to wander. I remember thinking about school, about a girl named Becky I had a crush on, about the new Star Wars movie I wanted to see. The sky started to change from black to a deep, dark blue, then to a bruised purple. You could start to see the shapes of the trees without the flashlight. The world was waking up, and the swamp sounds were getting louder. It's a lonely feeling, but it's a good lonely, or it usually is. Then I heard it. It wasn't a deer. I knew the sound of a deer moving through the brush. They're light, careful. This was different. This was a heavy, deliberate sound, a slow, slogging step, then a pause, then another step. It was coming from my left, from the thicker, wetter part of the swamp, where the water was probably knee-deep. My first thought, stupidly, was that it was a bear. We had black bears around, but they were shy. They didn't usually come through here. My heart started thumping in my chest, a hard, fast rhythm against my ribs. I slowly, so slowly it felt like my bones were creaking, brought my shotgun up to my shoulder. I rested the barrel on the log and peered down the sights, trying to see into the gloom. The sound kept coming. Slog, pause, slog. The light was still pretty bad, just that early morning grey where everything looks the same colour. The mist was rising off the water, making everything hazy. I was holding my breath, my finger resting on the trigger guard. I was focused so hard on where the sound was coming from that my eyes started to water from not blinking. Then it stepped out from between two cypress trees. It wasn't a bear, it was tall, so damn tall. I'm 6 feet now as an adult, and I know for a fact this thing would have towered over me. It had to be 7 feet, easy, and it was built, not like a bodybuilder, but thick, powerful through the chest and shoulders. Its whole body was covered in this matted black hair. It was wet, just dripping. Water was running off its arms and legs, pattering softly on the leaves underneath it. It looked like it had just walked out of the deepest part of the swamp. It was shaped like a man, but it wasn't a man. The proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. Its legs were thick like tree trunks, but its head is what I remember most, what I still see sometimes when I close my eyes. It was set forward on a thick neck, and it had a sort of cone shape, with a heavy brow ridge that shadowed its face. I couldn't see its eyes, not clearly, just dark pits under that brow. I was frozen, completely and utterly frozen. It wasn't a choice. It was like every muscle in my body just locked up. My brain was screaming at me to move, to run, to shoot, to do something, but I was just a statue. I had the shotgun pointed right at its chest, but my arms felt like noodles. I couldn't have pulled the trigger if I tried. The thing took another step. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking off to the side, its head tilted a little, like it was listening to something. It moved with a strange, fluid grace for something so big and heavy. It didn't seem clumsy at all. Its feet, I saw then, were big and broad, caked with mud. Then it stopped. Its head slowly, so slowly, turned towards me. I don't know if it saw me. I was camouflaged, and I was downwind, but it knew I was there. It must have caught my scent. The air was still, and the smell of me, soap, wool, gun oil, must have just drifted right over to it. Its head swung around until it was facing my direction. I still couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel it looking at me. It was a physical pressure, a weight on my skin. We stood like that for what felt like an hour. Me, a 14-year-old kid, paralyzed with a shotgun I was too scared to use, and this thing, just staring at me from 40 feet away. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. I could feel a cold sweat break out all over my body, a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. My jaw was clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. It didn't make a sound, no growl, no huff, nothing. It was completely silent. The swamp around us had gone quiet too. The frogs had stopped. The insects had stopped. It was like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what this thing would do. Then it moved. It didn't charge. It didn't threaten me. It just turned its head away, back to where it had been looking before, and took a step. Then another. It walked away, moving off into the trees with that same slow, deliberate pace. It didn't look back. It just disappeared into the shadows between the cypress knees and the hanging moss, the sounds of its footsteps fading away until there was nothing. The second it was gone, the spell broke. I collapsed. My legs just gave out, and I fell onto my side in the wet leaves. I was gasping for air, my chest heaving. I started to cry. Not like a little kid crying, but these deep, ragged sobs that hurt my throat. I was shaking all over, a full body tremble that I couldn't control. I curled up into a ball right there on the ground, my face in the dirt, and I just cried and shook. I don't know how long I laid there. It could have been 2 minutes, it could have been 20. The sun was properly up now, casting long, sharp beams of light through the trees. The swamp sounds had started up again, the frogs croaking like nothing had happened, but everything had changed. I forced myself to get up. My clothes were soaked and covered in mud and leaf litter. I wiped my face on my sleeve, my hands still trembling so bad I could barely hold my shotgun. I fumbled with it, breaking it open and taking the shell out. I didn't want it loaded anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. I started walking, then I started jogging, and then I was just running. I crashed through the undergrowth, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything except getting back to the truck. Branches slapped my face and snagged my coat, but I didn't slow down. My heart was hammering again, this time from pure, blind panic. All I could think was that the thing was behind me, that it was following me, that those long arms were reaching for me. I burst out of the tree line and saw the truck. My dad was already there, leaning against the hood. He had a small doe tied to the fender. He looked up as I came stumbling out, my face probably a mess of tears, mud, and sheer terror. "Mike, what in the hell happened to you?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "You fall in the creek?" I just stood there, panting, trying to catch my breath. I looked back at the dark line of trees I'd just run from. It seemed so normal now, just a swamp in the morning light. I opened my mouth to tell him. I wanted to tell him everything. The words were right there. "Dad, I saw something, a monster, a big, black, hairy monster." But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come out. It sounded too crazy. He'd think I'd lost my mind, or that I was making up a story because I was scared of being in the woods by myself. He was a practical man. He believed in what he could see and touch. So I just shook my head and looked at the ground. Tripped, I mumbled, my voice hoarse. Slipped in the mud and fell. Scared the crap out of me. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could tell he didn't really believe me, but he just nodded. "All right, get in the truck. You're a mess." The ride home was quiet. I stared out the window, watching the world go by. People were mowing their lawns. Kids were playing in a yard. It all looked so safe, so normal, but I felt like I'd been to another planet and back. I kept seeing it in my mind, over and over. The way it stepped out of the trees, the way the water dripped from its fur, the way its head turned. I never told my dad. I never told anyone, not for years and years. I just buried it. But it never went away. That thing, that creature, it got under my skin. It started a fire in my head. I started reading everything I could find. Books about strange animals, about folklore, about things that science said didn't exist. I'd go to the library and spend hours in the weird little sections they had. I found out there were other people who'd seen things, who had stories. They called it Bigfoot or Sasquatch or a dozen other names. That day in the Devil's Orchard is why I ended up spending my whole life interested in this stuff, in cryptozoology. It's not a hobby. It's an obsession. It's me trying to find an answer for what I saw when I was 14 years old. Because I know what I saw. It was real. It was there. And sometimes, on a quiet fall morning when the mist is rising, I can still feel it watching me. Story 12. I was 11 years old. It was September of 1979, just a few days after Hurricane Frederick had torn through Mobile Bay. Our house on Hurricane Road was a wreck, no power for days, and the heat was so thick and wet you could almost drink the air. My grandparents lived a half-mile down the same road, right near Perkins Landing, and they had a little store attached to their property that ran on a generator. They had ice. That's why I was out there. My dad sent me. It was late, past 9 o'clock, which felt like the middle of the night to me back then. The world was so dark without the streetlights. It was a deep, country dark, the kind you don't see anymore. The only light I had was this big, heavy metal flashlight my dad gave me. It threw a decent beam, but everything outside that circle of yellow light was just black nothing. I remember the weight of the humidity on my skin and the smell, this overpowering smell of pine and salt water and something else, something rotten. The hurricane had torn up so many trees, and the swampy areas had flooded, so everything was just stewing in the heat. I was walking on the side of the road, the gravel crunching under my sneakers. I wasn't scared, not really, annoyed more than anything. I was a kid. I wanted to be inside, not on some errand. Then the dogs started. It wasn't the normal barking you'd hear. This was different. It was frantic. A pure panic sound coming from the woods to my left. I knew those dogs. They were the Johnson's hounds, a few properties over. They were usually lazy, but this was a high-pitched, yelping, terrified noise. It didn't sound like they were chasing something. It sounded like they were running from something. I stopped walking. My heart, which had been thumping along just fine, suddenly kicked up a notch. I swung the flashlight beam toward the noise, toward the tree line behind the old Miller house, which was dark and empty. The light swept across the peeling white siding, the overgrown bushes, the dark shapes of the pines. And that's when I saw it. Something enormous ran out from behind the house. It didn't lope or amble. It ran on two legs, upright like a man, but the sheer size of it was all wrong. It was just a massive dark shape for a second, a blur of motion that my brain couldn't process. It covered the distance from the back of the house to the edge of the tree line in maybe 2 strides, and then it just stopped. It stopped dead in its tracks, right at the edge of the woods. And it turned to look at me. My flashlight beam hit it full on. I saw it clearly. It was covered in hair. This wet-looking, dark brown, almost black hair that was plastered to its body in some places and stuck out in clumps in others. It had to be 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were huge, hunched and powerful. But it was the face. God, the face. It wasn't like a bear's face. It was flatter, but distorted, like something that was put together wrong. The mouth was open, and I could see these large, dark teeth. And the eyes glowed, a bright, hellish red. It wasn't a reflection. The light from my flashlight wasn't making them glow red. They were generating their own light, like 2 hot coals shoved into its skull. Time just stopped. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was frozen solid, my fingers locked around the flashlight, holding the beam right on it. My brain was screaming that this was impossible, that this thing couldn't exist, but there it was, standing there, looking right back at me. The dogs had gone completely silent. The whole world had gone silent. All I could hear was the blood roaring in my ears. Then it moved. It didn't just run. It charged. It came straight for me. It didn't run like a man either. It was this explosive, terrifyingly fast motion, a blur of raw power. It covered the 40 or so yards between us in what felt like a single heartbeat. The ground seemed to shake. 1 second it was at the tree line. The next it was just a few yards in front of me, right there on the edge of the road. And it stopped again. It was so close I could smell it. The smell hit me like a physical blow. It was a mix of things. wet dog, but 1,000 times stronger, and underneath that, a foul, musky stench, like a bog that had been stirred up. And something else, something metallic like old blood. The heat coming off its body was immense, a wave of animal warmth that cut through the humid night air. It was even bigger up close. The hair on its arms was thick and matted. I could see the powerful muscles in its chest and shoulders working as it breathed. Its head was tilted down just slightly, those red eyes burning into me from under a heavy brow. Its mouth was still open, and a low rumbling sound was coming from its chest, a growl that I could feel in my own ribs. I was still frozen. My legs were like 2 blocks of wood. I was going to die. I knew it. This thing was going to reach out with one of those huge, long arms and just tear me apart. I could see its hands hanging at its sides. They were huge, with thick fingers. I couldn't look away from its eyes. Those red, glowing eyes held me there. Then the growl in its chest rose in pitch, becoming this high, screeching roar that was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't deep and guttural like a lion. It was piercing, a shrieking, grinding sound that felt like it was scraping the inside of my skull. It was a sound of pure rage. That sound broke the spell. A scream tore out of my throat. It wasn't a thought-out thing. It was a raw, primal reaction, a burst of pure terror that came from somewhere deep inside me. I didn't even know existed. I just screamed, a high, shrill, panicked shriek. The moment I screamed, the creature flinched. It jerked its head back, almost like my scream had hurt its ears. Those red eyes widened for a split second, and then it moved. It didn't come for me. It turned and bolted. It moved so fast, it was just a dark streak. It crashed into the woods across the road from me, not even where it had come from. The sound of it moving through the undergrowth was incredible. Snapping branches, crashing leaves, the whole forest seemed to protest its passage. And then, in maybe 2 or 3 seconds, the sound was gone. It had just vanished into the darkness. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I turned and I ran. I ran for my life. I stumbled, my legs still shaky and numb. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the gravel and went out, plunging me into total darkness. I didn't stop to get it. I just ran. I ran blind. My arms flailing in front of me, my feet hitting potholes and gravel, threatening to send me sprawling with every step. I could hear my own sobbing breaths, the frantic pounding of my heart, the slap of my sneakers on the road. I was sure it was right behind me, that I could feel its hot breath on my neck, that those long arms were about to grab me. I don't know how I didn't fall. I just ran, fueled by a terror so complete it took over my whole body. The half-mile to my house felt like a marathon. I finally saw the faint glow of my house's windows, the lanterns my mom had lit inside. I burst through the front door, gasping, crying, my chest heaving. My parents were in the living room. My mom jumped up. "What in the world? What's wrong with you?" I was hysterical. I couldn't get the words out at first. I was just pointing back toward the door, babbling about a monster, a big monster with red eyes. My dad, he was always pragmatic. He sighed like I was being a dramatic kid. "Calm down, son. You probably just saw a bear. They get disoriented after a storm." "It wasn't a bear!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "It was standing up. It had red eyes. It charged me." They exchanged a look. I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe me. They thought I'd spooked myself in the dark. My dad finally agreed to go look, just to humor me. He grabbed his shotgun and a powerful lantern. I didn't want to go back out there, but I had to. I had to prove it to them. We walked back, me clinging to my dad's shirt, flinching at every sound. We found my flashlight lying in the road. He picked it up, clicked it, and it flickered back on. We went to the spot. He shone the lantern all around. There was nothing, no tracks. The ground was soft from the recent rain, but there were no giant footprints, no signs of a struggle. The only tracks were my own sneaker prints from when I'd run away. It was like it had never been there. "See," my dad said, his voice gentle but firm. "It was probably just a shadow. Your mind playing tricks on you in the dark." We walked back to the house, and they never brought it up again. They thought it was over. But it wasn't over for me. It's never been over. I'm a grown man now, but I still dream about it. I still see those red eyes when I close my own. I remember the way the air moved when it charged, the heat from its body, the sound of that screeching roar. I remember the smell. I know what I saw. It was real. It was there. And sometimes on a quiet, dark night when the wind is just right, I swear I can still smell that foul, musky stench. And I just know, it's still out there. Story 13. Okay, so this is something I've never really talked about outside of my brother and me, but it's been eating at me for years, and I guess typing it out might help, or maybe not. Who knows? But here goes. It was early summer back in 2008. My brother and I had planned this backcountry trek in Alaska for months. We'd always been into hiking and camping, but this was supposed to be the big one. The Windy Creek Ridge Trail north of Fairbanks. We wanted to experience the midnight sun, that weird, endless daylight that messes with your head after a while. The first day was pretty normal, just setting up camp, getting used to the terrain, all that. But the second day, that's the day everything changed. We woke up early, maybe around 6 in the morning, though with the sun barely dipping below the horizon, it was hard to tell. The air was crisp, kind of biting, but not too cold. We packed up our gear and started descending into this area called Garner Creek Gulch. The trail was steep, lots of loose rocks and mud from recent rains, so we were taking it slow. I remember my boots sinking into the soft ground with every step, and the sound of our breathing mixing with the distant call of some birds. It felt isolated, but in a good way, like we were the only people for miles. As we got deeper into the gulch, the trees thickened, mostly spruce and some birch, and the light filtered through in these weird shifting patterns because of the midnight sun. It was beautiful, but there was this growing unease I couldn't shake. My brother felt it too. I could tell by the way he kept glancing around, like he was expecting something. We didn't talk much, just focused on the hike. Then, around mid-morning, we caught this smell. At first it was faint, just a whiff of something rotten on the breeze. I thought maybe it was a dead animal or something, nothing unusual in the wilderness. But as we kept going, it got stronger, thick and heavy, like spoiled meat mixed with something else, something almost metallic. It made my stomach turn. My brother stopped and pointed ahead. "You smell that?" he said, his voice low. I nodded, and we both knew we had to check it out. We followed the stench, pushing through some low-hanging branches until we came into a small clearing. And there it was, an elk carcass. But it wasn't just any dead animal. This thing was messed up. Its legs were cleanly broken, like someone had snapped them with brute force, and the neck was twisted at this impossible angle. The body was mostly intact, but the way it was positioned, it didn't look like a wolf or bear kill. I've seen predator kills before. They're messy with claw marks and bites all over. This was different. It was too precise, almost deliberate. The fur around the brakes was matted with blood, and flies were buzzing everywhere, but the silence around us felt heavier than it should have. My brother knelt down to get a closer look, and I stayed back, scanning the trees. The smell was overwhelming now, sticking to the back of my throat. I could feel my heart starting to beat faster, this dull thud in my chest. "Look at this," my brother said, his voice shaky. He pointed to the ground around the carcass. That's when we saw the footprints. They were massive. I mean huge. The larger ones were nearly 2 feet long, human-like, but with splayed toes, like fingers digging into the mud. And there was a smaller set, maybe 16 to 18 inches, all pressed deep into the ground, like whatever made them weighed a ton. The impressions were fresh. No rain had washed them away yet. We just stood there, staring. I remember the mud was cold and wet under my boots, and I could feel the dampness seeping through my socks. My hands were trembling a little, and I shoved them into my pockets to hide it. We started looking for more clues, moving slowly, like we were afraid to disturb something. The tracks told a story, a brutal ambush, You could see where the elk had been running, then these big footprints closing in, circling it. It was like something had hunted it down, bare-handed. I kept thinking, what kind of animal does that? Bears don't break legs like that. They maul, wolves go for the throat. This was different. It felt intelligent, calculated. My brother pulled out his camera. We always carried one for documenting the trip, but this felt wrong, like we were trespassing. He laid his hunting knife next to one of the larger footprints for scale and took a few photos. The click of the camera sounded too loud in the silence. I remember the way the knife's blade gleamed in the weird Alaskan light, and how the footprint looked even bigger next to it. The splayed toes were distinct, almost like a human's, but wider, with deep impressions where the heel and ball of the foot had pressed down. It made the hair on my arms stand up. That's when the tension really set in. It was this chilling feeling like we were being watched. The air got still, no birds chirping, no wind, just dead silence. I could feel my skin prickling, and I kept turning around expecting to see something in the trees. My brother must have felt it too, because he stood up quickly, his face pale. "We need to go," he whispered, and I didn't argue. We packed up our stuff in a hurry, not even bothering to cover our tracks. The whole way back up the gulch we were practically running, our backpacks bouncing and making too much noise. Every few steps, I'd glance over my shoulder, scanning the ridges above us. The trees seemed to close in, shadows stretching in the perpetual daylight. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and the squelch of mud under our boots. My muscles were tense, ready to bolt at any sound. At one point, I thought I saw movement, a dark shape shifting between the trees higher up on the ridge. I grabbed my brother's arm and pointed, but whatever it was gone in a second. He just shook his head, his eyes wide. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The fear was like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I kept thinking about those footprints, how deep they were, how whatever made them must be strong enough to take down an elk without tools. And if it could do that, what could it do to us? We made it back to the main trail by late afternoon, but we didn't stop. We kept going until we reached a higher ridge where we could set up camp for the night. Setting up the tent felt like a chore. My hands were still shaking, and I fumbled with the poles. The whole time, we were both scanning the surroundings, listening for any sound out of place. The midnight sun cast long, eerie shadows, making everything look distorted. I remember the temperature dropping, a chill settling in that had nothing to do with the weather. Once the tent was up, we crawled inside and just sat there for a while, not talking. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things we weren't saying. I could hear the faint rustle of the tent fabric in the breeze, and every little noise from outside made me jump. My brother finally pulled out the camera, and we looked at the photos again. On that small screen, the footprints looked even more terrifying, so clear and detailed, with the knife beside them emphasizing the size. We zoomed in on the splayed toes, the depth of the impressions. It was proof, but proof of what? We didn't know, and that was the scariest part. I kept replaying the day in my head, the smell, the carcass, the tracks, the way the air had felt charged like before a storm. I remembered the physical sensations, the cold sweat on my back, the way my throat had tightened when we first saw the footprints. It wasn't just fear, it was this deep, primal dread, like we'd stumbled into a place we weren't supposed to be. We didn't sleep much that night. Every crack of a twig or rustle in the bushes had us sitting up, hearts pounding. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was fitful, filled with dreams of dark shapes and broken bones. When we woke up the next morning, the sun was still there, relentless, but the terror hadn't faded. We packed up and hiked out as fast as we could, not stopping until we were back in Fairbanks. Even now, all these years later, those photos are burned into my memory. I've shown them to a few people, but no one can explain it. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking I smell that decay or feel that chilling tension all over again. It left a mark on me, on both of us. We don't talk about it much, but when we do, it's always with this quiet understanding that we saw something we can't explain. Something powerful and intelligent that's still out there in the wilderness. And that's the part that haunts me. Not knowing what it was, or if it's still watching. Story 14. It was July of 1976, and the Florida heat was a thick, wet blanket you couldn't shake off. The kind of heat that made your shirt stick to the car seat and the air feel like you were breathing through a damp rag. I remember the date so clearly because it was just a few days after the 4th, and the whole country was still buzzing with that bicentennial energy. But out where we were, it felt like a different world entirely, a world that time had forgotten. We were driving through Valuia County, a part of Florida that isn't on any postcard. It was late, must have been past 10 o'clock, and we were on this 2-lane road that cut through nothing but undeveloped land. No streetlights, no houses, just this long black ribbon of asphalt swallowed up by pine scrub and saw palmetto on either side. The darkness was absolute, the kind where your high beams only push it back a few dozen feet before it just swallows the light whole. I was in the passenger seat, my friend driving. We weren't talking much, just listening to the staticky AM radio fade in and out, the hum of the tires on the road, a constant drowsy sound. I was just staring out the window, watching the wall of trees flicker past in the headlights, when my friend slowed the car, not a hard brake, just a gentle easing off the gas. We were coming up to a turn onto another eastbound road, just a dirt track really, barely wider than the car. As we started the turn, the headlights swept across the shoulder, and that's when I saw it. My first thought, my very first stupid thought, was that it was a person. Some guy crouched down, maybe fixing a shoe or looking for something he dropped. But that thought lasted for half a second, maybe less, because as the light settled on it, my brain just stalled. It wasn't a person, it was a creature, a big one. It was squatting right there on the edge of the gravel, maybe 15, 20 feet from the car. It was huge. Its body was heavy, massive through the chest and shoulders, and it was covered in this long, shaggy hair. The hair wasn't a uniform color. It was a reddish brown, like rusty iron, but dirty, you know, like it had been rolling in mud and leaves. The strands were all different lengths, hanging off it in clumps, uneven and matted. It was in a deep squat, one of its arms, and it was an arm, a long, powerful-looking arm, was down, its hand busy on the ground. It was picking at something or gathering something, its fingers moving with a weird, deliberate purpose. Then it brought its hand up to its face, and I saw the head tilt forward. It was like it was smelling whatever was in its hand, or maybe tasting it. I couldn't see its face from that angle, just the top of its head and the curve of its massive back. We were moving slowly now, just creeping along, and the headlights were fixed right on it. I could see details that are burned into my mind forever. Where the hair was thinner on its chest, I could see the skin underneath. It wasn't like fur-covered skin. It was leathery dark, almost black, like old, worn-out leather. The build of this thing was just powerful. Its shoulders were so wide they seemed to block out the trees behind it. Its arms were long, hanging down, and even in that squat, you could tell if it stood up it would be towering. Its hands, when it brought them up, looked human, but bigger, with thick fingers. I saw its feet too, planted flat on the ground, and they were also shaped like a person's feet, just enormous, splayed out in the dirt. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it felt like a bird trapped in a cage, slamming against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. I was just frozen, my eyes locked on this thing. I remember my mouth was hanging open. I think I made a sound, a little gasp or something, because my friend glanced over at me, but he hadn't seen it yet. He was just slowing down because of the turn. Then, as we drew almost even with it, the thing raised its head. It turned and looked right at me. That was the moment. That was the moment the world stopped being the world I knew. Its face. It wasn't a monster's face. It wasn't snarling or roaring. It had a heavy brow and its eyes. Its eyes were the most shocking part. They were reflective, like a dog's or a deer's in the headlights, but there was intelligence there, a deep, curious intelligence. It looked directly into my eyes, and its expression was one of mutual surprise. It seemed just as startled to see us as we were to see it. There was no aggression, no anger, just this profound, silent recognition between two things that were never supposed to meet. Its gaze held mine, and in that split second, it felt like it was looking right through me, into some part of my soul I didn't know existed. And then the terror hit. Not from the creature, but from my friend. He finally saw it. I heard his breath suck in, a sharp, ragged hiss. His foot slammed down on the accelerator. The car engine roared, a sudden violent sound that tore through the quiet night. The car lurched forward, the headlights jerking away from the creature on the shoulder. For a second, as the lights swung away, I got one last glimpse. It was still looking in our direction, its head turned, those reflective eyes now just pinpricks in the sudden darkness behind us. Then it was gone, swallowed by the night. We sped down that eastbound road, the engine screaming. Neither of us said a word. The silence in that car was heavier and more terrifying than any scream could have been. I was gripping the dashboard so hard my knuckles were white. I could feel the vibrations of the car through the soles of my feet, up my legs. My whole body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake. I felt cold, ice cold, despite the sweltering heat. I kept staring into the side mirror, expecting to see it running after us, a huge, dark shape barreling down the road. But there was nothing, just blackness. My friend was driving like a man possessed, his hands clenched on the wheel, his face pale and slick with sweat in the green glow of the dashboard lights. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide. I finally managed to turn my head and look out the back window. Nothing. Just the empty road disappearing into the dark. We must have driven for 10 minutes like that, flat out, before he finally let up on the gas a little. The car slowed to a normal speed, but the silence remained. It was a thick, choking silence. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I could hear my own ragged breathing. I looked over at my friend. His jaw was tight. "Did you see that?" I finally whispered. My voice was hoarse, cracked. He just nodded, a quick, jerky motion. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. "What was it?" I asked, even though I knew he didn't have an answer. He shook his head. "I don't know. I don't know." We drove the rest of the way home in that same dead silence. The radio was off. The only sound was the wind rushing past the windows and the hum of the tires. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd seen. A bear? No. No way. The proportions were all wrong. The way it was squatting, the human-like hands, the way it used its fingers. Bears don't do that. They don't bring things to their face to smell like that. And the eyes. A bear's eyes are small, piggish. These were large, intelligent, reflective, and the size. If it had stood up, I have no doubt it would have been 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. It had to weigh 400-500 pounds. It was solid. A person in a suit. That was the other thought, the rational one, the one I desperately wanted to believe, but it was impossible. The way the muscles moved under that leathery skin, the sheer bulk of it, the way the hair hung. It wasn't a costume. It was living, breathing. I saw its chest move. I saw the subtle shift of its shoulders. It was real. It was absolutely, undeniably real. The rest of the night is a blur. We got back to town, the streetlights feeling alien and too bright. We pulled up to my place, and I got out of the car without a word. He just drove off. We never really talked about it again, not in any real detail. It was like an unspoken agreement. If we didn't talk about it, maybe it wouldn't be real. But it was real. I lay in bed that night, and for many nights after, staring at the ceiling, seeing its face every time I closed my eyes. those curious, reflective eyes looking right at me. I could smell the damp, earthy smell of the swamp that must have been on it. I could feel the weight of its presence, a physical pressure in the air around me. The fear didn't go away. It just changed. From the sharp, immediate terror of the encounter to a low, constant dread that sat in the pit of my stomach. I thought about reporting it, calling the sheriff or the wildlife service or somebody. But what would I say? I saw a big, hairy man-thing in Volusia County. They'd have laughed me out of the office, or worse, they'd have gone looking for it. The thought of a bunch of men with guns and dogs going into those woods, hunting it down, the idea made me feel sick. It hadn't threatened us. It hadn't chased us. It had just looked at me, with what seemed like surprise, maybe even a kind of innocence. I couldn't be responsible for bringing harm to it, so I kept my mouth shut. Over the years, I've heard things, whispers mostly, stories from other old-timers in Florida about the skunk ape. They say it smells like rotten eggs and sulfur, hence the name, but I didn't smell anything like that. Maybe the wind was wrong. They talk about its size, its strength, how it vanishes into the swamps like it was never there. Every time I hear one of those stories, my heart does that same little stutter it did in the car that night. I know what they saw. I know it's real. I've never gone back to that specific stretch of road. I couldn't. Even the thought of it makes my palms sweat. That single day, those few minutes on a dark road in July of 1976, rewired something in my brain. It showed me that the map of the world we all carry in our heads is wrong. There are blank spaces on that map, places where the rules are different, and things we can't explain live in the shadows just beyond the reach of our headlights. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, or maybe if you're chosen for some reason you'll never understand, you turn a corner and your lights sweep across one of those blank spaces, and something looks back. Story 15. Okay, so this is something I've been carrying around for a while now, and I guess I need to get it out there. I'm Eric Lawson, and this happened to me back in July of 2022. I'd been camping solo in the Gallatin Range in southwest Montana for years. It was my go-to spot when I needed to clear my head. That summer, I was craving solitude bad, so I headed up to this ridge I knew well. A place I'd always trusted to be peaceful. I never expected what went down that day to change everything for me. The morning started out perfect. I woke up early, packed my truck with the usual gear, my hammock, a small tent I never ended up using, a cooler with some basics, and my water filter. The drive up was smooth, just me and the winding roads, the air already warm with that summer smell of pine and dust. I got to my usual spot around mid-morning, a little clearing nestled between two big pine trees that I'd camped under before. The sun was filtering through the branches, casting these dappled shadows on the ground, and everything felt right. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this place, how it always felt like my own little sanctuary. Setting up camp was routine. I strung my hammock between those two pines, making sure the straps were tight and secure. I'd done it 100 times, so it was muscle memory. Then I cleared a patch for a fire, scraping away dry leaves and twigs with my boots until I had a decent circle. I gathered some fallen branches and built a small pile, not too big, just enough for cooking and a bit of warmth later. The whole time, the forest was alive with noise. Birds chirping, squirrels chattering, the occasional rustle in the underbrush. It was the kind of hum that makes you feel part of something bigger, you know. Not in a deep way, just comforting. I spent the afternoon just lounging around. I filtered water from a nearby stream using my pump. The water was icy cold and tasted pure, like minerals and earth. I cooked up some beans and sausages over the fire I'd lit, eating slowly while watching the trees sway in the breeze. I remember the heat of the sun on my skin, the way it made the sweat bead up on my forehead, and how good it felt to just sit and do nothing. I didn't have my phone on me. I'd left it in the truck to disconnect, so it was just me and the sounds of the wild. At one point, I lay back in the hammock and dozed off for a bit, the gentle rocking lulling me to sleep. Waking up, the light had started to soften and the air felt cooler. I felt content, like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. As evening rolled in, I added more wood to the fire and watched the flames dance. The sky turned this deep orange and purple, and the stars began to peek out. I've always loved how quiet it gets out there at night, but this time it felt different. Not in a bad way at first, just heavier. The usual noises started to fade. The birds went silent. The squirrels vanished. I figured it was just the night settling in, so I didn't think much of it. I cleaned up my cooking stuff, doused the fire with water until it was just embers glowing faintly, and climbed into my hammock. The fabric felt familiar against my back, and I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, listening to the last whispers of the forest before drifting off. I must have been asleep for a couple of hours when something jolted me awake. It wasn't a noise at first, it was the absence of noise. The silence was so thick it felt like a weight on my chest. I lay there in the dark, my heart starting to pound, and that's when I heard it. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps. Not like a person's, but deeper, like something massive was moving slowly, deliberately. The ground actually vibrated with each step, a low thud, thud, thud that I could feel through the hammock straps. My breath caught in my throat and I froze, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe it was a bear. I'd seen them out here before, but this sounded bigger, more deliberate. Then my hammock jerked violently. It wasn't a gentle sway, it was a sharp, hard pull that slammed me against the fabric. I gasped, my arms flailing, and that's when I heard it, a deep, wet exhale right beside my ear. It sounded like someone breathing through mud, guttural and close. I could smell it too, this rank, musky odor, like wet fur and decay. Before I could even process it, one of the hammock straps snapped with a loud crack, and I was hurled to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I landed hard on my side, pain shooting up my ribs. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against dirt and pine needles, and that's when I saw it. In the faint glow from the fire embers, this massive, dark-haired creature loomed over me. It was huge, way bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. Its shoulders were broad, almost hulking, and its head was sloped, like it didn't have much of a neck. I couldn't see its face clearly, just this shadowy outline, but I could feel its presence, this raw, primal energy that made my skin crawl. It let out another low growl, and the sound seemed to vibrate through the ground. My mind was racing, screaming at me to run, but I was paralyzed, just staring up at this thing. Then it moved toward me, and before I could react, it grabbed me. Its hands, or whatever they were rough and strong, wrapping around my arms. It started dragging me through the brush, away from the camp. I fought like hell, kicking and thrashing, but it was like trying to move a boulder. The undergrowth tore at my clothes and skin, branches scraping my face and arms. I could feel the dirt and leaves grinding into my wounds, and the creature's grip was iron tight, its fingers digging into my flesh. Every time I struggled, it growled again, this deep, rumbling noise that echoed in my ears. I was screaming, but it came out as choked gasps, my throat raw with fear. We weren't moving fast, but it felt like an eternity. I could see glimpses of the trees whipping past, the darkness swallowing everything. My mind was a blur. All I could think was that this was it. I was going to die out here alone. Then, from somewhere deeper in the woods, another sound cut through. A call, like a high-pitched shriek mixed with a roar. It wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I knew. The creature holding me stopped dead, its grip loosening slightly. It let out a responding grunt, and in that split second, I seized the chance. I wrenched my arm free and scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking so bad I almost fell again. I didn't look back. I just ran blindly downhill. I crashed through bushes and over rocks, my breath coming in ragged sobs. Every step, sent jolts of pain through my body. My ribs ached from the fall, my skin was stinging from the scratches, and my muscles felt like jelly. But adrenaline kept me going. I could hear things moving behind me, heavy footsteps and more of those guttural sounds, but I didn't dare glance back. Branches slapped my face, and I tripped over roots, stumbling and catching myself on tree trunks. The darkness was absolute now. No moon or stars to guide me, just this oppressive blackness that made every shadow feel alive. I don't know how long I ran. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe half an hour. But eventually, the ground leveled out, and I burst through a thicket onto a dirt road. I collapsed onto my knees, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. The road was rough under my hands, gravel digging into my palms. I stayed there for a moment, just trying to catch my breath, listening for any sounds from the woods. Everything was quiet again, but it was that same eerie silence from before, and it made my skin prickle. That's when headlights appeared in the distance. A truck, a big rig, was rumbling down the road toward me. I waved my arms frantically, my voice hoarse as I shouted for help. The truck slowed and stopped, and the driver jumped out. He was an older guy, looked like a long-haul trucker, and his eyes widened when he saw me. I must have been a mess, clothes torn, covered in dirt and blood, shaking like a leaf. He helped me into the cab, asking what happened, but I could barely get the words out. I just kept saying, something was in the woods. It dragged me, over and over. He drove me to the nearest town, and the whole way I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see those creatures following us. When we got there, he offered to take me to a hospital or call the authorities, but I refused. I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. How could I explain something like that? It sounded insane. I just thanked him, got my stuff from my truck, and drove home. A few days later, I sold all my camping gear and left Montana for good. I couldn't stand being anywhere near those woods. Even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that night. The memory of being dragged, the feel of those rough hands, the sound of those breaths right next to me, it's all burned into my brain. Sometimes I wake up sweating, thinking I hear those footsteps again. I never figured out what those creatures were, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is that day in July changed me, and I'll never be the same. Story 16. Okay, so this is something I've been turning over in my head for a while now, and I've only told a couple of people because, honestly, most folks would think I'm nuts. But I need to get it out there, because it's been eating at me since it happened. This was back in September of 2022. I'd decided to take a solo camping trip to this really remote spot in South Carolina, deep in the wilderness, way off the main trails. I'd been there before a few years back with some buddies, but this time I wanted to be alone, you know, just to clear my head, get away from all the noise of daily life. The area is mostly mixed hardwood forest, thick with oaks and pines, and there's a creek that runs through it, so you can always hear the water babbling if you listen close. It's peaceful, or at least it was supposed to be. I'd driven out there in my old camper van, which is basically my home away from home. It's not fancy, just a converted van with a bed, a small kitchenette, and enough space to feel cozy. I parked it in a small clearing I remembered right near the creek so I could fall asleep to the sound of the water. The first couple of days were exactly what I needed. Quiet, no cell service, just me and the woods. I spent my time hiking, reading, and basically just decompressing. The weather had been nice, cool, but not cold, with clear skies at night that let the stars shine like crazy. It felt good to be disconnected. Now the day it happened started out totally normal. I woke up around 7 in the morning, made some coffee on my camp stove, and just sat outside for a while, watching the mist rise off the creek. The air smelled damp and earthy, like it always does in the woods after a cool night. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this spot all to myself. I didn't see another soul the whole time I was out there, which was part of the appeal. Around midday, I went for a hike along the creek, following it upstream for a couple of hours. The forest was alive with sounds, birds chirping, squirrels rustling in the leaves, the occasional snap of a branch. Nothing out of the ordinary. I even saw some deer tracks and what looked like raccoon prints in the mud near the water. It felt safe, familiar. I got back to the camper in the late afternoon and spent some time just lounging around. I read a book for a while, one of those thrillers I'd been meaning to get to. As the sun started to set, the light faded fast and the woods got that deep, shadowy look. I turned on the battery-powered lamp inside the camper and the cozy feeling settled in again. I was sitting on my bed, propped up against some pillows, totally absorbed in my book. The only sounds were the pages turning and the occasional creak of the van settling. It was maybe around 8 o'clock, already dark outside, when I first heard something. It started as this faint tapping on the roof of the camper. At first I thought it was just a branch or something, maybe a pine cone falling, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Tap, 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 pause, then tap, tap again. It wasn't random. I put my book down and listened harder. My heart started beating a little faster, not out of fear yet, just curiosity. I figured it might be an animal, like a squirrel or a bird, but it sounded heavier than that. The tapping grew a bit louder, and it settled into a pattern, almost like a code. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, another pause. It was eerie, but I tried to shrug it off. I've been camping enough times to know that woods make weird noises at night. Then, after a minute or so of that, I heard something else, a deep, steady exhale from outside. It wasn't like the wind. It was too controlled, too human-like, but way deeper, like someone or something was breathing right outside the camper. That's when the unease really set in. My skin prickled, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I sat there frozen for a second, just listening. The tapping had stopped, but that breathing sound was still there, low and consistent. I could hear it even over the gentle rush of the creek. Part of me wanted to stay put, to just ignore it and hope it went away. But another part, the curious part, pushed me to see what was going on. I've always been the type to investigate, even when it's probably stupid. So, slowly I got up from the bed. My legs felt a little shaky, but I forced myself to move. I grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy-duty ones, and unlocked the camper door. The handle was cold in my hand, and I took a deep breath before pushing it open. Stepping outside was like entering a different world. The air was cool and crisp, with that distinct forest smell of pine and damp soil. The sky was clear, filled with stars, and the moon was just a sliver, so it was pretty dark except for the starlight. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam around the clearing. At first I didn't see anything, just trees, shadows, the glint of the creek in the distance. But I could still feel that presence, like someone was watching me. It's hard to describe, but it was this heavy feeling in the air, like the woods had gone dead silent. All the usual nighttime sounds, the crickets, the owls, had stopped. Everything was still. I took a few steps away from the camper, my boots crunching softly on the leaf litter. My heart was pounding now, and I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. I kept the flashlight beam moving, scanning the tree line, and that's when I saw her. About 15 to 20 feet away, just at the edge of the clearing, stood this enormous figure. I say her, because that's the impression I got. It felt feminine somehow. She was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung down past her knees. Her body was covered in dark brown hair, thick and matted, almost like fur, but it looked more like hair you'd see on a person, just way denser. She was standing perfectly still, and her eyes, deep-set, intelligent eyes, were fixed on me. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe for a second. The flashlight beam caught her full on, and she didn't flinch or run. She just stood there, looking at me with this calm expression. Her face wasn't aggressive or angry. It was almost serene, And then she made this sound, a gentle cooing, almost melodic, like a soft hum. It was low and soothing, but it sent chills down my spine because it was so out of place. Here was this massive creature, something I'd only ever heard about in stories, and she was cooing at me like a mother comforting a child. I was torn between sheer terror and this weird sense of awe. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a bear or a deer, it was something else entirely. Her size alone was overwhelming. She towered over me, and I'm not a small guy. I'm 6 feet tall, but she made me feel tiny. Her arms were so long that if she reached out, she could probably have touched me from where she stood. But she didn't move toward me. She just kept watching, her eyes locked on mine. They were dark, almost black, but I could see the intelligence in them. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was like she was studying me, taking me in. The cooing sound continued, soft and rhythmic, and it seemed to fill the silence around us. I could feel my hands trembling, and I had to grip the flashlight tighter to keep it steady. I didn't dare look away. Part of me was afraid that if I blinked, she'd disappear, or worse, charge at me. But she didn't. She just stood there, completely silent except for that cooing. I noticed how fluid her movements were when she shifted her weight slightly. It was graceful, not clumsy like you'd expect from something so big. Her hair rustled softly in the breeze, but she made no other sound. No crunching of leaves, no heavy breathing aside from that initial exhale I'd heard earlier. We stayed like that for what felt like a long time, but it was probably only about half a minute. 30 seconds of pure, intense focus. My brain was screaming at me to run, to get back in the camper and lock the door, but my feet were rooted to the spot. It was like I was hypnotized by her presence. Then, without any warning, she turned her head slightly, breaking eye contact. Her movement was so smooth, so effortless, that it barely seemed to disturb the air. She took a step back, into the shadows of the trees, and then she was gone. Just like that. Vanished into the forest without a sound. No rustling branches, no footsteps, nothing. It was as if she'd never been there at all. I stood there for another minute, maybe two, just staring at the spot where she'd been. The forest sounds slowly started to return. A cricket chirped, then an owl hooted in the distance. It was like the world had been on pause and now it was resetting. I finally managed to lower my flashlight, and my arm ached from holding it up so long. My whole body was trembling, and I felt cold sweat on my forehead. I stumbled back to the camper, my legs like jelly, and practically fell inside. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every little noise made me jump, the wind rustling leaves, the creek gurgling, even the camper creaking. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head. Was it real? Did I imagine it? But it felt too vivid, too solid. I could still hear that cooing sound in my mind, and the image of her eyes was burned into my memory. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the bed, staring out the window into the darkness, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The woods stayed quiet, normal. When dawn finally broke, the sky turned from black to grey, and I forced myself to go back outside. The air was chilly and dew covered everything. I walked over to where I'd seen her, my heart still thumping, and there in the soft soil near the tree line were footprints, huge footprints. I knelt down to look at them, and my breath caught in my throat. They were broad, about 17 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. The impressions were deep, like whatever made them was heavy. I used my hand to measure. My own hand is about 7 inches from wrist to fingertip, and these were way bigger. I just stared at them, feeling a mix of fear and wonder. This was proof, at least to me, that I hadn't dreamed it up. I spent the next 2 days there, partly because I was too shaken to leave right away, and partly because some small, stupid part of me hoped I'd see her again. But I didn't. The woods went back to normal. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the creek flowing. It was like the encounter had never happened, except for those footprints, and the memory burned into my brain. I took photos of the prints with my phone, but they don't do it justice. They just look like blurry shapes in the dirt. When I finally packed up and drove home, I felt different, humbled, I guess. The wilderness isn't just trees and animals. It's something more, something deeper. Knowing that creatures like her are out there, roaming places where few humans go, changed how I see the world. It's not just empty land. It's home to things we don't understand. I've never told this story to many people because who would believe me? But it happened, and I can't forget it. That night, that presence, that silent regard, it stuck with me, and I doubt I'll ever fully make sense of it. Story 17. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone outside of a couple of close friends. And even then, I downplayed it because who's going to believe me, right? But it's been eating at me for years now, and I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has seen something similar, or maybe I'm just losing it, but I swear this happened. I'm a hunter, have been since I was a kid. My dad taught me, and his dad taught him. It's in my blood. I'm 41 years old, and I've spent more time in the woods than most people spend in their own backyards. Central Utah, specifically the Manti La Salle National Forest, is my stomping ground. It's rugged, steep ridges, pine draws that go on forever. And in November, it's cold as hell early in the morning. That's where this all went down, back in November 2019. That morning I was out before sunrise, like I always am during deer season. The air was so crisp, it felt like it was slicing through my layers. I had on my heavy coat, gloves, the whole works, but the cold still seeped in. I parked my truck off a dirt road that's barely maintained, one of those spots where you need four-wheel drive just to get in. The sky was starting to lighten up from black to a deep blue, but the sun wasn't up yet. I grabbed my spotting scope and rifle, slung them over my shoulder, and hiked up to a ridge I've used before. It overlooks a big canyon, perfect for glassing mule deer. The ground was frozen in patches, crunching under my boots, and the pine trees were so thick in some areas you could barely see 10 feet ahead. I set up on a rocky outcrop, using a fallen log as a rest for my elbows. The spotting scope is one of those high-end ones, lets me see for miles. I started scanning the opposite ridge, looking for movement. At first, everything was quiet, just the usual. A few squirrels chattering, the wind rustling the pines, that kind of thing. Then I saw something. Way off in the distance, maybe 300 yards across the canyon, there was a dark shape moving along the ridge crest. I adjusted the scope, thinking it was a bear. We get black bears out here sometimes, but they're usually smaller and don't climb ridges like that. This thing was crawling on all fours, but it didn't move like any bear I've ever seen. Its limbs were too long, and its body was bulkier, almost like a person's build, but way bigger. The hair was dark brown, matted and coarse like it hadn't been cleaned in years. It was dragging itself along, but not clumsily. It was smooth, purposeful. My heart started beating faster. I've seen bears up close. I've even had a few stand their ground. But this felt different. I kept the scope on it, my hands getting sweaty inside my gloves. The creature paused for a second, and that's when I noticed the proportions. Its shoulders were way too broad for a bear, and the way it held its head. It wasn't low to the ground like an animal. It was more upright, even on all fours. I remember thinking, what the hell is that? But I didn't say it out loud. I was alone, and the silence around me felt heavier all of a sudden. Then it happened. The thing slowly pushed itself up. I mean, it rose to its full height, and I swear to God it had to be nearly 9 feet tall. My breath caught in my throat. It stood there, legs apart, with a chest so broad it looked like it could bench press a car. Its arms hung down past its knees, long and muscular, covered in that same matted hair. But the worst part was its head. It wasn't shaped like a bear's, it was more human-like, but not quite. The face was dark, and I couldn't make out features from that distance, but it had this intelligent gaze. It scanned the terrain, turning its head slowly, like it was looking for something, or someone. Me. I ducked behind the brush so fast, I almost dropped my scope. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I crouched there, trying to make myself small, peeking through the branches. The fear was immediate, like a cold wave washing over me. I've been scared before, like when a moose charged me once. But this was different. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This felt calculated, like it knew I was there. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and I had to force myself to slow it down. The cold air burned my lungs. After what felt like forever, I risked another look. The creature was moving again. It dropped back down to all fours and crawled a few yards, then stood up and took a couple of steps. Its stride was long and heavy, like each step was deliberate. When it walked upright, it didn't wobble or shuffle. It moved with a grace that shouldn't belong to something that big. Then it went back to crawling, and the fluidity of it was unnerving. It was like it could switch between the two without even thinking, like it was built for both. I've seen videos of gorillas, but this was nothing like that. This was smoother, almost silent, except for the crunch of pine needles under its weight. That's when I heard it. A deep, chest-rattling grunt that echoed through the canyon. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was lower, more guttural, like something you'd feel in your bones. The sound made the hair on my arm stand up. It came from its direction, and it was so loud it seemed to vibrate in the air. I froze, my body tense. I've heard bears make noise, but this was deeper, more resonant. It sounded like it was communicating, but I had no idea what it meant. The grunt hung in the air for a few seconds, and then everything went quiet again, except for the wind. I knew I had to get out of there. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but I didn't want to make noise. I slowly packed up my scope, my hands shaking so bad I fumbled with the straps. I kept my head low, crawling backward away from the ridge until I was sure I was out of sight. Then I stood up and started hiking back to my truck, moving as fast as I could without running. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that thing following me, but I didn't see anything. The whole way back, I felt like I was being watched. It was this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was right behind me. When I got to my truck, I threw my gear in the back and climbed into the driver's seat, locking the doors immediately. I sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, trying to calm down. My hands were still trembling, and I had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. The cab was cold, but I was sweating under my clothes. I started the engine and drove out of there, not even thinking about hunting anymore. All I wanted was to get back to town, to somewhere with people, but I couldn't just leave it at that. Later that day, after I'd calmed down a bit, I called up a buddy of mine. He's a hunter too, and he's seen some weird stuff out here, so I knew he wouldn't laugh it off. I didn't give him all the details, just said I saw something strange and wanted to check it out. We drove back in his truck, since mine was still a bit rattled from the morning. The sun was higher now, but the forest felt different, darker, even in the daylight. We parked near where I'd been that morning and hiked up to the ridge. I showed him the spot where I'd hidden, and we crossed over to where the creature had been. The ground was softer there, with patches of soil between the rocks. And that's when we found them. Footprints. Huge, human-like footprints, about 15 inches long. They were deep, like whatever made them was heavy. The toes were broad, and the arch was pronounced, but it wasn't like a bear's print. Bears have claws, and these didn't. They looked more like a giant human foot, but not quite. Nearby, we found handprints too, pressed into the soil. They were massive, with long fingers and a palm that was wider than my own spread-out hand. The fingers seemed to have an almost human shape, but again, too big, too rough. But the weirdest part was the smell. As we were looking at the prints, I caught a whiff of something musky and earthy, like wet dog mixed with damp soil. It was strong, and it hung in the air around that area. My friend noticed it too. He wrinkled his nose and said, "What is that?" I didn't answer because I knew. It was the same odor I'd vaguely noticed earlier, but now it was concentrated. We didn't stick around long. We took some photos with our phones, but the light wasn't great, and the prints didn't show up well. I remember feeling this dread building up again, like we were trespassing on its territory. We hiked back to the truck in silence. On the drive home, my friend asked me what I thought it was, and I just shook my head. I didn't want to say it out loud. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you call it. It sounds crazy, even to me, but I know what I saw. When I got home, I recorded everything in a private journal on my phone, just voice notes, because I didn't want to forget any details. I didn't share it online or anything. I kept it to myself. For months after that, I avoided that area. I'd hunt in other parts of the forest, but I never went back to that ridge. Every time I thought about it, I'd get this chill, like someone was watching me. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling, the way that thing moved, the intelligence in its gaze. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else, and knowing it's out there in those remote hills haunts me. I've never seen it again, and part of me hopes I never do. But I'll always wonder what it was and why it was there that day. Story 18. So there we were, my boy asleep in the passenger seat, his head leaning against the cold window, and me, bleary-eyed, guiding my old Ford Bronco through the San Luis Valley. It's a stretch of road I've driven 100 times, but never this late. It's different at night. The mountains, which are just beautiful in the daytime, become these huge, dark shapes that feel like they're leaning in on you. The world outside the headlights just disappears into a void. The heater was chugging away, blowing lukewarm air, and the radio was picking up nothing but static and bits of a country station from a town too far away to matter. I had the window cracked just a little, and the air coming in was so cold it burned the inside of my nose. I was focused on the yellow line, just following that curve of the road, my mind already halfway home, thinking about getting the boy to bed and maybe having a beer before I turned in. Then I rounded this bend, a gentle curve I know like the back of my hand, and my headlights swept across the road ahead, and it was there, right in the middle of my lane, just standing there. My brain didn't know what to do with it at first. It was tall, so damn tall. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet. It was standing on 2 legs like a man, but it wasn't a man. It was covered in this shaggy, dark hair, like a wet bear, but the shape was all wrong. It was lankier, its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, and its ears. They were pointed, sticking up through the matted hair on its head. But the worst part, the part that just froze the blood in my veins, was its eyes. They glowed, a dull, reddish orange, like the embers of a dying fire. They didn't shine like an animal's eyes do in the headlights. They just had their own sickly light. Time didn't slow down. That's a lie people tell. It just stopped. For one single heart-stopping second, everything was perfectly still. The static on the radio, the hum of the engine, the soft snore from my son. Me, with my hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, my foot hovering over the brake. And this thing, just standing there, staring right into the headlights, right into me. Then it moved, it didn't turn, it didn't run away on 2 feet. In one single fluid motion that was so fast my eyes could barely track it, it dropped. It went from standing straight up to being on all fours. There was no stumble, no awkward transition. It was like a puppet whose strings were cut, but it was the exact opposite of collapsing. It was powerful, intentional. The moment its front hands, I don't know what else to call them, hit the pavement, it launched itself off the road. It didn't scramble, it ran. It ran like a wolf, but bigger, so much bigger than any wolf. The power in its haunches was terrifying. It just exploded across the shoulder of the road and vanished into the blackness of the pine trees in 2, maybe 3 strides. It was so fast, it was just a dark blur, and then it was gone. The sound it made, it wasn't a roar. It was this low, guttural woof sound, like a huge dog exhaling hard but deeper, coming from a chest that was way too big. The sound seemed to hang in the air for a second after it was gone. That's when the shock hit me. It was a physical thing, a cold wave that started in my gut and rushed out to my fingers and toes. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful hammering. I could feel every single thud. My hands were suddenly slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I didn't scream, I couldn't. My throat was locked shut. My first instinct, the only thing my body knew how to do, was to get away. I stomped on the brake, not a panicked slam, but a hard, firm push. The Bronco shuddered to a stop. We were maybe 50, 60 feet from where it had been standing. I couldn't take my eyes off that spot on the road, the empty, dark asphalt. My headlights were just illuminating nothing, but my mind was filling in the blanks. I could still see it there. I could still see the way it dropped. My son stirred. "Dad," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Why are we stopped?" That voice, small and confused, snapped me back into the world. I couldn't let him see how scared I was. I couldn't let him know that something was out there in the dark that shouldn't exist. "Nothing, buddy," I said, and my voice was too high, too tight. I cleared my throat. "Just thought I saw a deer. Go back to sleep." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes glued to the road ahead and to the tree line on my right. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of the wind through the pines sounded like something big moving through the undergrowth. My mind was racing. Do I drive forward? Do I just go past the spot where it was? The thought of driving over that exact piece of road made my skin crawl. What if it was just waiting in the trees? What if it jumped out? No. No way. I did the only thing that felt safe. I put the car in reverse. The gear shift was stiff, and the clunk it made was incredibly loud in the silence. I started backing up, keeping my foot on the brake, moving slowly. I was watching the road behind me in the rear view, but my attention was split, my eyes constantly flicking back to the tree line. I backed up for what felt like a mile, but was probably only a few hundred yards, until I found a wide enough spot in the road, a little pull-off for fishermen usually. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost fumbled the shift into drive. I executed a clumsy three-point turn, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. The whole time, I felt exposed. The driver's side window felt like it was made of tissue paper. I was sure that at any second, one of those long, hairy arms would smash through the glass. Finally, I was pointed back the way I came. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the gas pedal down, harder than I needed to. The engine roared and we shot forward, away from that bend, away from that thing. For the next 20 minutes, I drove like a madman. I kept checking the rear-view mirror, expecting to see those glowing eyes following us, keeping pace with the car. I saw nothing but darkness. My son fell back asleep, thank God, lulled by the motion of the car and my false, forced calm. I took the long way home. It added almost an hour to the trip, winding through other valleys and over a different pass. I didn't care. I would have driven to another state if I had to. I just couldn't go back down that road. The rest of the drive is a blur. My heart didn't really start to settle down until I saw the lights of our little town in the distance. When I pulled into our driveway and shut off the engine, the silence was overwhelming. I just sat there for a minute, listening to the tink, tink, tink of the engine cooling down. I looked over at my son, still peacefully asleep, completely unaware of the horror that was burned into my mind. I carried him inside, put him to bed, and then I went to the kitchen. I didn't pour a beer. I poured a whiskey, a big one, and I drank it straight down. It burned, but it didn't erase the image. The next morning, after I got my son off to school, I drove to the county sheriff's office. I felt stupid walking in. What was I going to say? The deputy at the desk was a young guy, looked bored. I told him I wanted to report something I'd seen on the San Luis Valley Road last night. He pulled out a form. What was it? A deer. We get a lot of car-deer collisions out there. I took a deep breath. It wasn't a deer. I described it. The height, the hair, the pointed ears. I got to the eyes, the way it dropped and ran. My voice started to shake again. I could feel my face getting hot. The deputy had stopped writing. He was just looking at me, his expression neutral, but I could see it in his eyes. That look. This guy is nuts. Look. He finished scribbling a few more things. Okay, sir, we'll make a note of it. You never know, could have been a bear standing up. They can look funny in the dark. It wasn't a bear, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I know what a bear looks like. Right, he said, not looking at me. He tore off a carbon copy of the form and slid it across the counter. It was barely half filled. Here's your copy. You have a good day now. I took the slip of paper and walked out. I knew I'd never hear from them, and I never did. That was years ago. My son is a grown man now. He doesn't remember that night at all. Sometimes I think about telling him, but what's the point? He'd probably give me the same look the deputy did. But I know what I saw. I didn't imagine it. The memory is as sharp and clear today as it was that night. The cold air, the static on the radio, the way my heart tried to punch its way out of my chest, and that thing, the way it stood there so still, and then the way it moved, that smooth, powerful, unnatural drop onto all fours. That's the part that haunts me the most, the sheer, impossible fluidity of it. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't a man, it was something else, and it was out there. Story 19. It was Friday morning, the 19th of September, 2014. I remember the date because it was supposed to be the start of a perfect weekend. I'm from Knoxville, and I've been hiking these trails my whole life. The Cherokee National Forest is my backyard, or it was. I haven't set foot in the woods since that day. The weather was perfect, cool in the morning, but the sun was out, and you could tell it was going to warm up just enough to be comfortable. I'd packed my gear the night before. It was a solo trip, just 2 nights out on a ridge I'd been to a handful of times before. It overlooks this deep, dense valley, so thick with trees you can't see the bottom. I liked the solitude. I craved it. That's why I went out alone. I got to the trailhead around 10 in the morning. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. I remember slinging my pack on my back, feeling that familiar weight settle on my shoulders. It was a good weight. It meant I was free for a couple of days. The hike in was uneventful, just the way I liked it. The sound of my boots on the dirt, my breathing, the birds, normal forest sounds. I made it to my spot on the ridge by mid-afternoon. It's a clear patch with a great view, a place where a lot of people camp. I'd been there before, like I said. It felt safe. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, all the usual stuff. I remember feeling really content, just sitting on a log, sipping water, and looking out over the valley as the sun started to go down. That's when I first noticed it. The silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was a dead silence. The birds had stopped singing, the usual rustling in the underbrush, the chatter of squirrels, it all just stopped. It was like someone had thrown a switch. The air felt heavy, thick. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I've been in the woods when it goes quiet because of a predator, a bear or a mountain lion. But this was different. This felt deliberate. Like the whole forest was holding its breath. I tried to shrug it off, told myself I was being jumpy. I got my small campfire going, cooked my dinner, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept looking over my shoulder into the trees. It was getting dark fast, and the woods around my little clearing were just a wall of black. My fire suddenly felt very, very small. I decided to turn in early. I doused the fire completely, made sure it was out cold. I didn't want any light giving away my position. That thought just popped into my head. I didn't even know what I was hiding from. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and lay there in my sleeping bag in the pitch black, just listening. Nothing. No wind, no crickets, nothing. It was so quiet I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake. It was a sound, a sharp crack, like a thick, heavy branch being snapped in two. Not a random twig. This was a branch. It was close, too close. My heart just started hammering against my ribs. I was frozen, lying perfectly still in my bag, straining to hear. My ears were ringing from the silence, and then the sudden noise. I held my breath. And then I heard it, a whisper. It was low, distorted. It didn't sound human. It was like static and gravel all mixed together. But I could understand it. It said my name, Evan. My blood went cold. I mean, literally, I felt a wave of ice wash down my spine and into my legs. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. This wasn't possible. I was alone. I was miles from anyone. It came again, closer this time, a little louder. Evan. It was right outside my tent. I could hear breathing now. Deep, slow, heavy breaths, like something huge was sniffing the air right next to the thin nylon wall of my tent. I could see the fabric move slightly with each exhale. A gentle push and pull. The smell hit me then. It's a detail I'll never forget. It was a mix of wet dog, rotten meat, and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. It was suffocating. Panic just seized me. Pure, unthinking terror. I didn't plan it. I didn't think about my gear or my pack or anything. My body just took over. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, unzipped the tent flap in one frantic motion, and I bolted. I burst out into the night, and I just started running. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran down the trail, away from my campsite. My feet pounded on the dirt, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. I could hear it behind me, not running, not at first. It was walking, but its footsteps were heavy. Thump, thump, thump. A slow, rhythmic, powerful sound, and it was keeping pace with me. I was sprinting, my lungs burning, and I could hear this thing just walking, its footsteps matching my pace, staying right behind me. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The moon was out, giving just enough light to see shapes. I saw it, a dark, massive shape, moving upright through the trees just off the trail. It was huge, broad-shouldered, and it must have been 7-8 feet tall at least. It wasn't crashing through the brush. It was gliding. It moved with an impossible fluid speed, weaving between the trees like they weren't even there. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip it. I clicked it on and swung the beam behind me. The light hit it for a split second. I saw those eyes. They were high up, maybe 7 feet off the ground. They weren't reflected like an animal's. They glowed with their own faint amber light. Just 2 little points of sickly yellow in the darkness. And in that same instant, it opened its mouth. It didn't roar. It roared my name. Evan! The sound was guttural, deafening. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a blast of noise that felt like it hit me in the chest. It was full of rage and intelligence and hate. It echoed through the silent forest, and in that moment, I knew. This thing knew who I was. It wasn't a random animal. It was stalking me. It had been watching me. It had learned my name. I thought about the other times I'd camped there, talking to myself, saying my own name out loud. Evan, get the fire going. Stupid, mundane stuff. It must have heard me. It must have been listening. That's when my flashlight died. It didn't flicker. It just went out. 1 second there was a beam of light. The next, total blackness. It was so sudden, so absolute. It felt like a physical blow. I was plunged into a darkness so complete, I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. I screamed. I don't even know what I screamed. I just let out this raw, terrified noise and kept running. I was tripping over roots, branches whipping my face and arms. I could feel warm blood trickling down my cheek. I didn't care. All I could hear was the heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of its footsteps right behind me, and that awful smell clinging to the back of my throat. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. My legs were jelly. My side was cramping, and I was crying, just straight up sobbing with fear. I thought I was going to die there, I was sure of it. Then through the trees, I saw a different kind of darkness, a flat, grey strip, a road, a service road. I put every last bit of strength I had into a final sprint. I stumbled out of the tree line and onto the gravel, my ankles twisting on the loose stones. I didn't stop. I ran down the middle of the road, my breath hitching, until I saw the familiar shape of my car, parked where I'd left it at the trailhead. I've never fumbled with keys so badly in my life. My hands were slick with sweat and shaking uncontrollably. I dropped them, scrabbled in the gravel, found them, and finally got the door unlocked. I threw myself inside, slammed the door and hit the locks. I sat there, panting, trembling from head to toe. I stared into the black wall of the forest, expecting those amber eyes to appear at any second. I couldn't see anything. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into gear. I spun the tires on the gravel, spraying rocks, and sped down that dark mountain road as fast as I dared, not slowing down until I saw the lights of the first town. I drove straight to my buddy Mark's house. It was the middle of the night. I pounded on his door until he answered, looking confused and half asleep. I must have been a sight, filthy, bleeding, eyes wide with pure terror. I couldn't even form a coherent sentence at first. I just kept saying, "It knew my name. It knew my name." The next day, in the cold light of a Saturday morning, I told him everything. He's a practical guy, a hunter. He thought maybe it was a bear, that I'd spooked it, that my mind had played tricks on me in the dark. But he saw the state I was in. He agreed to drive back out there with me. I wouldn't have gone alone for $1 million. We took his truck. The whole drive was silent. My hands were clenched into fists the whole time. When we got to the trailhead, it took me a good 10 minutes just to get out of the truck. The woods looked different now, menacing. We hiked up to the ridge. It was a beautiful day, sunny and clear, but the forest was still too quiet. We found my campsite. My tent wasn't just knocked over. It was ripped, long, savage tears in the nylon, like it had been slashed by huge claws. My sleeping bag was shredded, my gear was scattered everywhere, my cooking pot was crushed, my backpack was torn open, the contents dumped and trampled. It looked like a bomb had gone off. And then we saw the footprints. They were everywhere, pressed deep into the soft soil around where my tent had been. They were human-like, but not human. They were massive. Mark pulled out a tape measure from his truck toolkit, nearly 17 inches long. 17. The stride between them was enormous. They circled the tent site, over and over, a clear path of something that had been pacing around my tent while I was inside it. Mark just stared at them, then at the torn-up campsite, then back at me. All the color had drained from his face. He didn't say a word about bears after that. We gathered what was left of my gear, what hadn't been destroyed. It didn't feel like my stuff anymore. It felt tainted. We drove back to town in silence. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a dark shape moving through the trees along the roadside. That was it. That was the end of the story. I never went back. I sold or threw away all my hiking gear. I get anxious if I have to drive past a wooded area. The nightmares are the worst part. I'm back in the tent. I hear the whisper. I smell that smell. And I see those amber eyes floating in the darkness. I wake up gasping, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. I've read stories online, in forums like this. People talk about Bigfoot, Sasquatch. They make it sound almost mystical. This wasn't mystical. It was predatory. It was aggressive. It was intelligent. It knew my name. That's the part that haunts me, that keeps me up at night. Not the size, not the strength, but the awareness. The fact that it was watching me, learning about me, before it ever decided to let me know it was there. I wasn't just in its territory. I was its prey, and it knew exactly who I was.